get started whenever you're ready, Sue.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Oregon Early Learning Council on January 25th, 2023. It's our first meeting this year, so I guess we say Happy New Year to everybody. Hope that it has gotten off to a good start in the first few weeks. And it's clearly going to be an exciting year for us and for early childhood in this state. All sorts of exciting, positive movement forward, much of which we are involved in and will be involved in. So, great start. I'll ask Remy, our council administrator, to please call the roll.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so Angie Blackwell.
I'm here.
Katie Brooks is on the way. Peter Buckley.
Here.
Ann Kubich.
Here.
Khalid Thornlad is excused today. George Mendoza. And I know he's present because I see him and I know he is here. So we are going to mark him present. Dr. Peg Miller. Thank you. Let's see. Sue Miller, chair.
Here.
Subin O.
Here.
And I'll go back to Katie Brooks really fast just so she can say present.
Sorry, I was sneezing. Present.
Thank you, Katie. And all of our agency leads have been excused today in respect of the 2023 Oregon State Legislative Session, but we do have Alyssa Chatterjee here, so.
Right, and she will be here and off and online as she needs to run across the street, probably to the state capitol. So,
yeah, and we have a quorum, so we can get going.
All right, thanks. Well, we're going to start with a topic that is certainly not new to us, and it's our wonderful 5-year strategic plan. As you know, Council, we adopted this plan about 4 years ago, 2018, I believe it was. And it's trying to lay out the cross-sector, interagency coordinated effort to build an effective, equitable, comprehensive early childhood system for Oregon. Daunting task, but one that obviously we're making a lot of progress toward. And we're very fortunate that the BUILD initiative has been a primary player in crafting the first Raise Up Oregon, and now leading the way for us in the revision to Raise Up Oregon. It's a huge task to do a 5-year plan. Obviously, none of us probably has a clear idea of what things will look like in 2028, but we're going to give it a shot. So Harriet Dichter is with us, and she's been doing a lot of the work on our revision and the planning process for it. So Harriet, I will turn it over to you, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Sue, and hi to everyone. We put together a short PowerPoint, which I think Remy is going to put on the screen. Remy, do you mind posting it now? Okay, I'll see if I can share my screen. Let's see. Okay, good. Thank you, Remy. All right, so our focus today is really just to start to talk about where the community engagement process is heading. When Sue and I were discussing this in advance of the meeting, we're not specifically focusing on the content because while we did make improvements to the plan based on council feedback and based on feedback from the implementation action team and so forth, the changes were not really large substantive changes. So we want to make sure everybody knows feedback has already been incorporated, but we're really going to focus today on the rest of the processes to try to gather robust feedback on the current draft of the document so that the council is able basically during later months in 2023 to be able to move forward in terms of finalization. So Remy, if you could just go to the next slide, that would be awesome. So this is what I hope to cover. Basically, the overview of the community engagement, and then a little deeper into our 3 strategies, which we'll get into. So let's get into the next slide, if you don't mind, Remy. So the purpose of the phase of the engagement now is to try to make sure that council has been able to get information from families who have young children prenatal to age 5, that also to hear from people who have professional roles working with families with young children across the sectors of the plan, of course, and in general, state and community partners across the state. The focus point is prioritization point for the engagement is really to try to reach people in these roles who have been historically underserved by government. And our timeline for this phase of the engagement, which is really the last big phase prior to plan finalization, is starting this month. And we hope to be concluded basically by the end of May. So hopefully a sufficient period of time with lots of preparation to get this next phase of engagement done in a meaningful manner within the prioritization that has been set. Let's go to the next slide. So I think this will look pretty familiar to people because these are just what our guiding principles are for the engagement. And the guiding principles are really what we've said. The idea here is to try to really focus on families, professionals, communities that have been historically underserved by government. We're trying to have an emphasis on working with culturally responsive community-based organizations to include resources, especially for the work done through the early learning hubs, to ensure that we have appropriate compensation for people, and to do this in a way that we can understand as the process is going on, whether there are populations that are priority populations that we're not able to reach, so that we can take steps to really gather sufficient feedback from them. As I think we talked about, and actually, Anne, I think you were discussing this at the beginning of the meeting, that the definitions basically around equitable engagement include geography, so rural, urban, suburban, remote, rural, etc., socioeconomic status, languages spoken, race, ethnicity. Okay, so those are all guiding principles that have come from the work of council. Let's keep going to the next slide. The first strategy for the engagement that I want to focus on is one I know we've talked about before, and Sue has actually been a very active partner as well in sort of setting up and participating in the discussions for the early learning hub-led community engagement. So that engagement process has been in the works, and there have been a lot of meetings with the hubs already that have been held to sort of help prepare them and to work collegially together between staff for the council, basically, and hub staff for planning this engagement. And we're hoping the engagement will be live. It's been in the works, but that it will really be live in terms of meeting with people in community settings starting next month through April. And the hubs have actually taken on, and each one, and we have a map we'll show you in a minute, where hubs actually looked through the sectoral issues in the plan, and they sort of prioritized across the sector issues, since it's really important to get feedback on the whole plan. And then also population issues, as we've talked about, family members, as well as people who are working in the field and providing services to families with young children. So after the hubs are done with their engagement, they have a reporting back strategy, basically. So they'll be sharing information with ELD DELC, and then that will be accumulated, so it'll be able to be shared with council. as part of the feedback loop. In addition, the information, of course, will be shared with agency partners. So that's a little bit about how that piece of the engagement will go. There's facilitators guides that have been prepared cooperatively with the hubs to assist them. There's some templates for them to use so that information can be transmitted back and can be sorted and kind of put together in a way that can really create a meaningful feedback and opportunity for improvement for the plan itself. I think if we go to the next slide, I believe that our next slide is a map. So this map, I think, will probably look pretty familiar to people because this shows us basically the hubs. And this map has been color coded by sector. So this shows you where a hub is taking the lead on a certain sector, basically, of the plan, and that we have been successful in essentially getting all of the sectors to be covered. Now, the hubs also will be having some general inquiry and general opportunity as well to hear about other parts of the plan. So there is opportunity geographically on more than a sector basis, but this at least shows the sector focus and that we know all sectors will be covered in some depth throughout the state. And then, as we talked about, the hubs also have plans around these issues of populations that we reflected on in terms of making sure that there is good opportunity to reach family members. There's good opportunity to reach people who are actually doing the work with family members, and to look at really underserved populations in the mix. So again, there's been really great cooperation with the hubs in terms of understanding the state is big. There's a lot of geography to cover. There are a lot of issues. We want to really not just have superficial input, but opportunities in the meetings that people will be hosting for people to go a little deeper, as well as some of the general feedback about how the plan is doing in terms of reflecting both the problems, the assets of the state, and then as Remy likes to put it, the to-do list that really is the plan itself. Remy, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. Next strategy for engagement, as we said, there are sort of three strategies, is actually engagement for the council. And so on the docket coming up for meetings that the council will have basically in the period of March to May are opportunities for people to join all of you from different areas to be able to get into discussion to help refine, elevate, improve, validate the plan as we have. And so some of the kinds of groups that basically will to be included are Business and Philanthropy, Tribal Early Learning Alliance, the Oregon Housing Stability Council, and as we mentioned, we'd like to see the hubs themselves. They've been collecting a lot. They've had a lot of good stories to be able to be present with the council members themselves. So in this part of the strategy, time will be set aside on council meetings, basically moving forward over the coming months so that you all have additional opportunities for direct engagement on the plan draft and feedback and potential for improvement or refinement from where the plan is today. Remy, if you could go on to the next slide. The next slide is something that I don't think that we have talked about yet, but this strategy is really to have broad-based public comment for the plan. And in the broad-based public comment, basically the council's website will have additional pages added to it, and those pages will really be the plan. All right, a PowerPoint version of the plan with narration, because we want to make sure that people who aren't into reading have an opportunity to hear what's in the plan, a PDF or Word kind of version of the plan that's more similar to what has been circulated to date. And then in multiple language is a feedback form. And the idea for the web-based comment period will be to get that live by February and to run that at least through April. One of the things that is envisioned for this third prong of the engagement is to reach out to multiple partners to kind of publicize the opportunity. And I even wanted to mention here that if as council members, you're doing engagement in your home community, and I know as we've done work together, council members frequently, right, take things from the council and you get them on agendas in your home communities with your partners and report back. And so these forms also can be used basically by anyone, anywhere in the state. And we'll have good public facing materials, again, in multiple languages, geared towards different learning styles for people to be able to take a look at that. So those are core parts basically of the strategy, that we're anticipating. I think Katie has a question, which is, do we think that the council meetings will be held in different locations? So I'm going to turn that question to you, Sue. And then Remy, you can take the slide deck down if you want, so we can all look at each other.
Yes. We would love to have council meetings in other parts of the state. Historically, the council did that. And then I think budget constraints sort of limited that. And then COVID hit and nobody got out of their homes. So now that we are emerging again, it's something that I think I'm guessing all of us would welcome. And I was thinking about it this morning a little bit and wondering if we wanted to try to either hold, I don't think we can do it during the legislative session. Everybody's too tied to Salem. But I think either our September meeting or perhaps our October retreat would be an opportunity to visit another part of the state and ask one of our council members to host us somewhere. So we may drop into Bend, Katie. Watch out what you wish for, right?
Be happy to host.
Or Roseburg or Medford or LeGrand. Yeah, so I'm assuming council members agree that that would be a very positive step forward for us. Yeah. Okay, and I know a part of it is just time for us as well as staff to do the traveling, but yes, let's work on that. Staff and that's probably Alyssa, David, Serena, and Remy. So Harriet, at this point, do you want feedback on the engagement process that you've outlined? Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yeah, that would be great. Hopefully it's good feedback, but there's still opportunities to make improvements.
Yes. So, and let me just say one thing. When I joined the meeting for a while of the agency implementation team, which is an incredible group of agency partner managers, and they were saying that their agencies also have opportunities to get feedback on this draft plan. So I think that'll be another huge outreach effort and part of this engagement that will also reach the audiences and the people we want to hear from. So,
and I'm glad you mentioned that, Sue, because I think the online version is something that's meant to be generative for anyone who engages. So the agencies will have the consolidated materials in different formats to sort of support their engagement. We'll have the forms basically so that we have a way to collect information and actually find out. So they learned about the plan. What did they think? Like, what do they like? What do they think needs to be improved, et cetera. So we're hoping that the website itself will basically be useful. As I said, there may be things council members want to do with that, general public, distribution from ELD and the other agencies, and then potential other opportunities where the materials can be used and people can use the feedback form so that we really have a good way basically to collect information and to hear back from people.
Yeah. And as Harriet mentioned, hopefully each of us will be able to, get this out to our own networks in our own areas or not just geographic areas, but networks in which we work, and encourage people to just jump on the website and fill out the form. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really do like that idea of being able to have people go to the website, review the plan, and provide feedback. That's going to make it a lot easier. And I also really appreciate the hubs being at the center of this kind of outreach plan. So there's some positive stuff here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Actually, I was just thinking about, though, an improvement that we probably need to make, which is, Remy, we'll talk about this. It would be great if we can figure out a way for people to give feedback via video, because right now the forms we have, basically they're written forms. And so you write down your answers. I'm thinking about how when you buy things online now, when they ask you to do reviews, they give you the video thing. So maybe we can also explore a video upload. People just take a little film of themselves on their phone and get that in, so that we have different ways to continue to understand their different communication patterns that people have. And we don't want to be restrictive in terms of how people can hear the information, but also how they can give us feedback. It looks like Remy says we can do that, so can add that to the list of different ways to give your feedback.
I could, Sue, add to that. I think that's a really great idea. And the other piece that I really like about that, Harriet, is that a provider or a parent or somebody can actually give you on the spot video what the issues they may be talking about and demonstrate that and then talk to you. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, yeah, good point. Subin.
I want to appreciate there was a slide there talking about ways in which the Early Learning Council is actually going to get to kind of participate and be a part of the learning. Really liked seeing that. I think one of the challenges in anything like this is we're gathering so much information, and what comes out at the end of it is a bullet point or kind of a reduced kind of point about people's very rich lived experiences. Conversely, it's too hard for us to kind of learn everything about everything that's going on. And so my question is about kind of the flow of information and how we're going to be learning about it. It's hard to get it all at once, and then be able to have enough thinking time to be able to know what to do with that.
Sorry, I jumped on the camera for this one. But we have also talked a little bit about putting together a more, I think we will need that summary, as you're saying, but I think we also have discussed, but don't really have a full answer yet, of trying to put together a more complete compendium of the feedback that we receive. So that would be, up on the ELC's web, and thinking about that as an ongoing resource, not just for this revision process, but also to make sure that that information is captured. I think one of the things that we keep on hearing, also when we have these discussions with agency partners, but also hear from communities, is often state going back to the same families, asking the same questions. So I think one way to help address that concern is, if we don't, people are going to continue to do that if we don't document the conversations that are had. So I also think that's another reason why it's also important for us to see what we can do to more extensively capture the conversations beyond the level of information that's probably going to be needed to process for the revisions. And with that, I'll take myself back off camera.
Thank you, David. Yeah, good point. Maybe because Subin, one thing, a part of what I hear you saying is, if the council could kind of be kept current on what feedback is coming in, and not just have, a 50-page document in June. So maybe with Remy's help, we can build into our council meetings kind of an update on what's coming in through the website, and just say, here's what we're hearing so far. Assuming that the website becomes a really useful tool. So and I know from the listening sessions that Peter and Kali headed up, it was the quotes that were so impactful. So how we also integrate that in not just bullets of summarized thoughts. One other thought I wanted to throw out, and it's from my meeting with the implementation coordinating team. They suggested that we have some of the really leading research organizations in Oregon, early childhood research, like Portland State, OSU, Social Learning down at U of O, come and actually have a panel of them present to us on, they probably know this statewide arena as well as anybody, because some of them have been active in it for a long, long time. So maybe in addition to the other organizations that were on that list that Harriet shared, we want to try to set up a panel with some of these researchers and just say, where are we in Oregon? What have you learned, and what do you see as the greatest needs in the coming years? So I have a feeling we can learn a lot from some folks.
I really love that idea, Sue, because we've all been investing a lot in them. They know not only what's going on in Oregon, but what's going on in the field as a whole. They keep track of that. And so I think thinking about where we are with regard to the field as a whole would be really great. I know that Harriet does that for us too, but the local researchers really have done evaluations of a lot of programs. They've been doing a lot of training and so on. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, well, I won't take credit for it, but I thought it was a great idea too. So let's definitely tee that up, Harriet and Remy, as we look at a council agendas for the next several months. Other thoughts, other reactions to the engagement plan, anything that's missing? Any other ideas of how we can be supportive of it?
I think the only other thing I would add is that when we engage people, it's always really great to give them the feedback from their engagement. And so if we do things, let's make sure that we give the information back in some way.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And do you know, Harriet, is that built into the hub outreach feedback loop for the interviewees?
Well, we've asked the hubs to have this consolidated information, and we're going to meet with them as well, Sue, in the process to sort of debrief. So I think we'll have good opportunity then to have things available to them to go back, from what they're turning in, to be able to share back, and for sure as well the final plan, right? Everybody's in the hub engagement is seeing the draft. And, David made the point that we've got to figure out a good strategy for making visible, right, what it is people said and how they were heard, because it's kind of inauthentic otherwise. So I think based on what I know, the hubs will be able to be good partners in terms of their ability to reach back to people who came forward for this part of the engagement.
Okay, and I think it may be an opportunity to build that into the hub agenda, and maybe working with Carmen on that, but just to make sure that it's baked into their planning as they launch this engagement process.
Yeah, the other place I was thinking that is, we're far from this now, but when the council gets into dissemination, people may remember from Plan 1, there was a good effort spent. And of course, that effort is part of what got good ownership of the plan. So I think that's another place to go back again to everyone who's been involved, right? People who submitted comments, people who went to community conversations, to be able to share, as the dissemination occurs, and enter into additional conversation. Here's where we are. Here's what unifies us. in terms of moving forward.
Yeah. Great. Good point, Harriet. Yeah, and thanks, Anne, for bringing that up. You've brought that up in other venues, I know. Very important. Okay, anything else on Raise Up Oregon? This is the launch. So it's now the document that we have in front of us is what is on the website or will be, Remy. And it's what we're going to be asking for public comment on. So we know it'll look different, you know, by the end of the year when we have it put to bed, but I think it's a great beginning, thanks to council member input and lots of research and our implementation team and Harriet's amazing writing skills. Okay, let's go. Wow, Harriet, I don't know if you may have never thought we'd actually get to this point, but we did. And it's
I think it's super exciting. I mean, you know, it's really awesome how well first edition of the plan has been useful. So I'm very hopeful that, you know, edition 2 will be able to provide the same kind of backbone support for all the energy and forward progress.
Yeah. And somebody made the point that it actually has been a North Star. It's actually an active document that's being used. And Alyssa presented copies of the current Raise Up Oregon to the House Early Childhood and Human Services Committee, I think on Monday, if I remember correctly. So
That's right, Sue. Yep.
Yeah.
And Rep Reynolds is such an incredible chair, and she made sure everybody had a copy of the report and really kind of worked on trying to create a visual that really reflects the intersection of early childhood and human services in particular, since that committee is overseeing both bodies of work, but a lot of interest and excitement in the next phase of Raise Up Oregon and the opportunities for the committee to hear more about that as the work on the plan progresses.
Yeah. So it isn't sitting on a shelf somewhere. Just want everyone to know that. Okay, thank you. We will move on and obviously be talking about Raise Up Oregon at every council meeting in this year, probably. Okay, next on our agenda is the council work plan. And this is sort of a compilation of topics that we all have talked about. Obviously, many of them are reflected in or reflective of the Raise Up Oregon. And what we're trying to do with this document, obviously, is to lay out what are the primary topics and focuses that we as a council want to have in the coming year, at least in the next 6+ months. And so I asked Remy if she would just, well, before we put the work plan up on the screens, and we can just modify it as we go through it. I'm wondering, are there any just sort of general reactions to it, comments on it, that you all want to throw out before we start actually looking at it specifically? Okay, let's go ahead then and start going through the document. I guess a comment I would make is that, as you know from reviewing it, there are very few dots on this document, and a dot obviously indicates when we think it will be on a council agenda. But for many of these, we don't know that there's going to be an actual event or activity or report that would trigger it coming to a council agenda. So that's part of what we'll need to develop over the next month. And hopefully you all may have some input on that today so that we can start framing council agendas based on our work plan. And in the right column, it's obviously it is not comprehensive at all. It's just some pieces, some organizations, agencies, partners, reports that we're aware of that certainly can inform our conversation and discussion about the topics. But we're obviously missing a lot. And so we can fill that column in as well. So this first page is the cross-agency priorities. You know, it's something that will influence everything else in the document, basically. And so we need to figure out how do we integrate these issues and topics in council meetings. And we'll just go through the racial equity. I think we all know that we want to get updated on our early childhood equity fund. There's a report, and I think it'd be very helpful to get updated on the status of that. And I know there's a bill going to be introduced in the legislature to increase funding for that fund. The Housing Stability Council has a racial equity analysis tool. And this is just an interesting, I want to mention the Housing Stability Council. I didn't know that there was a Housing Stability Council until I met with the implementation team. So I think looking for governance partners for the council to connect with and ask their input on Raise Up Oregon and also what we should be doing is a whole nother opportunity this year for the council. We haven't really done that outreach to our peers, I guess you could say. So it's certainly another possibility. And then the Educator Advancement Council has an equity tool. ODHS has their North Star. And obviously, I'm sure every partner has some focus on equity, probably a major focus. So if you want to add anything in there, we can certainly do that now or do that later. So and we may come back to it, let's go to geographic equity. This is something that we talk about in council meetings. You know, how do we make sure the work we're doing actually works in all parts of the state, or at least we understand what its impact is on different parts of the state. And I asked Anne, because the Ford Family Foundation is very focused on rural Oregon. So I asked Anne if she would make a few comments about this specific issue.
And no, I just appreciate how the council as a whole continues to be concerned about geographic inequities and particularly delivering services in rural areas and the particular needs of rural communities, and how structuring anything from early learning to childcare centers to family supports is just different. And I really appreciate how everybody is sort of attuned to that. And it's come up specifically in a few places over time in terms of like reimbursement rates, just as an example, but I know that that's been on the agenda, so that's great. And I know that the home visiting service, the systems coordination group is really focusing on that. One of the things that that Kali raised and that Sue was just asking me about is there actually an official racial, geographic rural equity analysis? And there isn't one, but we as a staff often look through our own lenses to see those kinds of things. And I know that I can ask my staff to really comb through this and looking for places that really highlight some of the specific areas where we know that there is rural inequity. Sue, was there something in particular you wanted me to touch on there beyond that?
Well, would it make sense, and council members, for us to put in this box, say, develop a geographic equity tool?
Yeah, yes, and sort of, or undertake a geographic equity analysis, and maybe putting a tool makes it sound like there's a product out of it, and that may be a little bit ambitious, but I think we could do an analysis of as it stands right now, of sort of the report. I mean, all of these things. So yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, similarly, an analysis for me implies some kind of like report or something like that, which may be the case of what we want. I'm not close to the idea, but I wonder about a similar to kind of, I've seen this very common in board meetings where there's like an equity lens and there's some key questions that when it comes to decision points, we're considering the perspectives and needs of rural communities. Something along those lines could be useful as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that I appreciate where you're going with that, Sue, and it's not an actual extensive product as sort of a perspective and making sure that the right questions are put forward. Thank you.
Right.
I really liked Anne's terminology of rural impact analysis. I don't want rural to get lost in geographic equity, even though I know that's what we know what we mean. But I do like the calling out the equity. I mean, not equity, I'm sorry, rural impact.
Okay, good point, Angie. Good point. And I like your reminding us about the equity lens, Subin, because certainly we have a racial equity lens that we apply. And I don't know, Alyssa, if I can put you on the spot. I know you and your staff use an equity lens. And has there ever been talk about a rural equity lens?
Yeah, and I think Serena's on. So Serena, you can jump in. One of the things that Governor Kotek has done is set expectations for agencies, and that includes ensuring that we have a DEI action plan. So we're in the process of developing that, but for us, equity is more than racial equity and is inclusive of families and communities in rural Oregon and other communities who've been historically underrepresented or under-resourced. So we're not looking at this as a separate body of work. It's really inclusive within our definition of equity. And Serena, do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Yeah, because as we're talking to folks and bringing folks on, making sure that we're aligned with the statewide diversity equity lens, because it's a journey and it does include more to get people from being stuck on it just right. The equity lens being just about Black and white, that it's more than that. It's about economic development. It's about our rural communities. It's about our LGBTQIA plus community. It's about ageism, and it's about so much more. And so we're being inclusive in that, and how are we making sure that employees and folks that we're working with, our providers and our families, feel like they belong in the discussions and a part of what we're doing. And we're being really inclusive of all that involves. And also, I was the one that led the work on the statewide DEI Action Plan too as well. So we're doing that work. And making sure that it's aligned. There's 10 strategies in that plan, and there's several actions with each strategy. And we created that because most times you get the action plan, or this is a DEI this, or this is a DEI that, but it doesn't give anyone's directions or where to start. So each strategy is not prescriptive, but it gives us a start. The actions under each strategy, it wasn't exhaustive. Again, it was just give you some examples of what it could possibly look like as you're doing this work, or you can take some of that too. It goes into community engagement, communications. It crosses all lines with everyone, and not just the state of Oregon is using it, but it is being widely used outside in private entities and nonprofits as well.
We're in really good hands. And I dropped a link to that in the chat. That was released in 2021. But Serena led all that. So we're going to have a great DEI action plan.
So we have a head start, and with our early learning equity plan and everything that we're doing, we're using the same person that helped write the plan for the statewide as well. We're bringing that person on board with us. She's already sent the proposal in. We already have it into procurement. And so we're ahead of the work. We hope to have something by the middle of March to present to you. We're gathering all the information. And so we hope to be able to present at least a draft, and we're going to need some folks to be a part of the committee. So we'll bring that, you all can add your input, and we'll make changes. So we'll make sure that everybody has a hand in participating.
So Serena, will that be a DEI action plan for DELC? Or
Yes.
Okay.
Does it need to be expanded, Sue?
Well, for the council, we're going to be interested in the cross-sector one, the state agency one, but certainly we'd love to have in March to see what's been drafted for DELC.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it will be for DELC. Yeah.
Yeah.
ELD DELC. Yes. As we're going forward.
I'm not meaning to discount that. It's kind of
no. It's the statewide DEI action plan. It was the framework for everyone because everyone's going to look different, right? Depending on your agency and who you're working with, what you do, and all that. We just wanted to give folks a starting point, and also, again, the strategies to lead them in the work, to not be exhaustive. And they don't have to use those exact strategies, or they can, and they don't have to be in order. But it gives them an example, because again, we have some agencies that have not started the work. We have some agencies that are way ahead, and then we have some in the middle. There's folks at the beginning of the spectrum, at the end of the spectrum, where they are. And we did it so it meets people where they are at that time and place as we moving the work forward. And if you take a look at it, and if you have any questions after you go through it, I'll be happy to answer any of those questions and take you through it too as well.
Awesome.
And
we also provided history in there too, as to let folks know our why we're doing this as a state. And so that was important to have that in there too. And we talked about target universalism, what it actually means. So if one community, like a rural community, may need some extra help at this time, it doesn't mean that we're forgetting or not providing help to anyone else as well. So giving folks an understanding of what that means.
Yeah. And so Governor Kotek has set an expectation that all agencies have our DEI action plan completed by June 1st. So that'll be a great way to see that kind of cross-sector nature, and that will also create some consistency so that we can more easily compare, combine, build off of each other's work going forward. So we'll have to figure out that new deadline with the council's Raise Up Oregon kind of timelines, but I think we'll be in a much better place to leverage each other's work from that.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that it crosses all sectors so that we don't leave any of our work out. So it will touch all of that. So that's why it's going to be important to get your input, you all's input, as well as our staff's input.
Awesome.
And providers.
How exciting. And we're lucky to have you, Serena, at DELC now.
Oh, thank you, Sue. I'm lucky to be here with you all.
Oh, we appreciate you.
Thank
so
you.
Remy, let's put a dot on this matrix in March and have it be the, draft. I understand it'll be a preliminary DELC DEI action plan. I think that's the correct language. And then maybe we can roll into that presentation, sort of, what's the big state action plan that you're fitting into, Alyssa and Serena. So, great. And so we'll probably revisit that again, if not in June, then in September, when we can see all of our partners' plans as well. And it's, okay. So whether we really want to make a distinction between racial equity and geographic equity, or if we want to talk about DEI in general, I don't know how people feel about that.
So can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
The racial equity, when you look at that DEI action, it's included in that. It's all part of, we did not separate it out because it was important to do that, so that we're centering that racial equity, as we've done always, as we've created that, and we were really intentional about that. And it did go before the Racial Justice Council too as well already.
Okay. And
Just some thoughts.
is the Racial Justice Council still operating? The governor is going to keep it?
That's our understanding. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, we can, look at that as we go. Thank you. Any other comments from council members on DEI and equity before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to say, I really appreciate that the geographic equity is pulled out, because I do think that there's something that is different about geographic isolation, under-resourced. It's not just the under-resourced problems that we see with a lot of people of color, and it's also the geographic isolation, the distances that you have to take into account. So I appreciate pulling out geographic equity for right now, at least. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Okay. All right, family voice and community engagement. Obviously, in May, we will hear from the hubs on the Raise Up Oregon engagement. I think all of our partners probably have engagement tools and toolkits. We just listed the couple that we are aware of. And yeah, the dots in May, because that's when the hubs will be reporting. There may be other community engagement opportunities that we want to take advantage of. Workforce. Yeah, I mean, obviously, huge priority for all of our partners, probably everybody in the state, public and private. So Ben Cannon, head of HEC, has offered to, provide an overview at some point on some of the workforce efforts going on in the state. We know it's a priority just about everywhere. I don't know if any of you have any suggestions of where and when the council might want to focus on this. Yeah, Katie.
Anytime, but I think it's a combination of HEC, and I know there's transition in Department of Education, but I also think CET programs within the high schools also play a role here.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, so whether we put in ODE and then CET programs.
So I wanted to add too that the regional workforce boards, some of the regional workforce boards are doing some projects focused directly on early childhood.
Great, let's put that in too, Remy, the regional workforce boards. I think one of the values of the council that I'm seeing increasingly in the forefront is getting some of these agencies and organizations that are critical for young children and their families to be successful, having them focus on young children and families and not just different populations. So just inviting them to a council meeting gets them to focus on young children and families.
When we talk about workforce, I say, like, first question is which one? There's a few different workforces we might be talking about here, but in terms of early education in particular, since part of this is also talking about retention and professional development, and working with the existing workforce, there's our CCR&Rs and the work that they should be that they're doing, and then also I think there are in the area of P3 where school districts are getting in the preschool game, people are using some of the grow your own strategies specifically in early learning. And so there's some models. I don't have anything in particular to point out off the top of my head, but I'm sure we can find some.
Great. And we actually, because workforce is such a talked about, and we've talked about it a lot for early childhood, we actually have left workforce as a specific topic under the ECE banner. So we'll add the CCR&Rs there, Suben, and then Grow Your Own can go there under alignment, CP3 alignment. Yeah, let's move those down, Remy. So other comments about workforce and, you know, what the council's role might be in this overwhelming universal challenge.
I think understanding the pipelines, I think the council needs to understand. I didn't know until fairly recently that locally we actually have bilingual instructors and bilingual materials for people who want to go into the programs to become a child care provider. So I just understand what is available. I think the program here is one that people speak highly of in terms of the assistance to be able to get into the program at Aurora Community College, have support from the CCRN, and have business advisory support as well as people start their own businesses. So
that reminds me, Peter's comment reminds me that of course there's also Oro and Oregon State University and their reports on the workforce. That seems like also a great place to start to get like kind of a bigger kind of landscape of the early care workforce.
Yep, good points, great points. Yeah, I think, you know, figuring out how we can really, I don't know if it's aggregate or learn from the many different successful programs and activities that are going on in the state at a local level, and how we share that information with, you know, a bigger audience is, I think, just a constant question I have. Because on every single council call, we hear about something that's happening that's really successful and helping young children and families. So how do we share that? I don't know. Okay, and I don't know the timing of this workforce conversation, but it'll be something we'll be trying to figure out. And then the early childhood research partners we talked about a little bit ago, vis-a-vis Raise Up Oregon. And I think we can, you know, try to have that panel maybe in April might be a target to consider. And that would be up above Remy. Yeah, why don't we just try for April and see if that works for the research partners. Okay. Anything else on any of these priorities across agency before we go to ECE? Okay, great, thanks. Great input. Okay, early care and education. This afternoon, we're going to hear about the alternative rate methodology and also get updated on Spark. We'll hopefully get an update on House Bill 3005, which is that big infrastructure facilities fund that had a hearing on Monday. Anyway, it's $100 million request, so it's big. June, we're going to have rules on ERDC and Office of Child Care for certified centers. And then ORO is not scheduled, but something that certainly affects availability of childcare and workforce. So other thoughts about the childcare arena, other pieces you want to put in there at this time? We touch on it again further down when we go to business and philanthropy, looking at them as partners. Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to it. Alignment of EC programs. Preschool for all is obviously a big one. So we're hoping we can have a presentation from them of an update, and then from DELC staff to understand how preschool promise and baby promise, OPK, et cetera, are interfacing with that preschool for all. And then we have a lot of EC programs listed there. And figure out how they're all working together. And part of that's the just work that Gwen and her staff are doing. With the Tribal Advisory Council, Angie and I have been invited to meet with their council in February. And I think that meeting has gotten set up, if I remember correctly. So as you know, Angie is our representative on the council or the alliance, Angie, or both?
The alliance, so the Tribal Advisory Committee has been replaced by the Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance. So I am the representative on the alliance, and this is actually a sticking point because each tribe gets 2 representatives, and I am not a representative from my tribe because I'm a representative of this council. So we may be talking about changing my role there just for future reference, but nothing that needs to be addressed right now.
And Angie, if I could add, we're in a little bit of transition because we can't have the alliance stood up until we have some of the backbone organizational structures in place. So we're still convening the Tribal Advisory Committee, which will become the alliance. And at that point, we'll drop that council rep because the alliance is only going to be comprised of tribal representatives. So we'll be able to get Angie on once the alliance is fully stood up.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. There's been a lot of moving pieces, Angie.
But Angie and I are going to meet with the TAC, the advisory committee, next month. Not okay. Anyway, we'll figure it out. But we will meet with the Tribal Advisory Committee. So that'll be exciting. Excited to see where the alliance goes. So here's the EC workforce. Any other bullets people want to add to that? Okay, we'll come back to it and figure out when we can have some conversations about that other than today. And then we're going to be adopting rules, as you know, and that's the schedule for those. All right, public education. And this is really focused mostly on ODE. Not a problem, Remy. Eventually, public education should also include higher ed and HEC, but it's such a new partner, we haven't had a chance to sort of do that integration. But we can do it today if you want to. So the kindergarten assessment reform, if you had time to click on the early learning transition check-in. That is, I think I'm right in saying, Alyssa, that's sort of the substitute for what used to be the KA.
Yes, yep, that's what we're calling kind of this project, and sort of shifting away from kindergarten assessment to really looking at what's happening beforehand and being that touch point for families. We're looking at a survey basis to start and piloting that. So eventually we'll fully move away from the kindergarten assessment language, but this transition check-in is sort of the project name for now.
Okay, and ODE is heading it up.
ODE is heading it up. We are kind of right alongside them, but we're able to leverage their data team, their research team, to kind of provide that infrastructure with our team providing support.
Got it. Okay. And then the State Board of Ed is listed, just once again, this idea that at some point, either reps of the council or the whole council, we may want to have a joint meeting with the State Board of Education and just talk about alignment and maybe focus on Raise Up Oregon if we want to, and if they're interested. P3 alignment, just a couple of initiatives that we're aware of. Professional development's a big part of that. And I'm just going to keep moving through this. So EIECSE, once again, we may want to try to meet with the State Interagency Coordinating Council, which is sort of the overseeing body for EIECSE work. And then there's that initiative that we've listed there. Anything else that people want to be sure is indicated for the EIECSE work?
My comments actually on the P3 alignment and referencing Kali's email that she sent around this, that there are school districts, more and more school districts that are getting into the P3 game. So, you know, we have great examples in, for example, Yoncalla, David Douglas, but now we have places like Lincoln County, Forest Grove, Beaverton, North Clackamas. There's all these other new school districts that are jumping into the P3 game. And so I wonder if there's some type of panel or something that we can pull around there. A lot of these school districts that I just referenced are in nascent, emergent, you know, kind of stages in their work. So could be a good place to do some learning.
Yep, great idea. That would be a really exciting panel, Subin. Yeah, so let's put a bullet in there, Remy, saying, you know, panel of school districts, and we'll know what it is. Yeah. Okay, and then literacy, obviously, once again, another huge topic, and lots of people doing research and working on that. In Kali's email, she suggested, you know, Oregon Kids Read, Our Children Oregon, STAND. There are lots of organizations. We could put together quite a panel if when we want to talk about literacy. And once again, Alyssa, I don't know if you can give us a quick update on the early learning and kindergarten guidelines, because that would be an us and ODE partnership.
Yeah, no, that work really got put on hold with the pandemic. And so with some kind of recent staffing changes on our side, we're looking at how we can lift that work back up. And we need to work with ODE to see if they still have the capacity to partner. But we are getting closer, I think, to having the right people in the right roles to offload some of the extra work different team members took on and really be able to focus on revising this. The initial thinking was actually driven by Miriam. So before I came back, to make sure we extended this down to infants and toddlers and not just focus on preschool and kindergarten, with some goals to also think about positive racial identity development through that process. So hoping to get that resurrected. I think the kind of preschool standards or preschool guidelines conversation really dovetails and has a lot of intersections with literacy as well, as we think about standard expectations for quality in all publicly funded programs, whether that's with state resources or local resources, and the expectations that families have of those programs. So more to come on that. I don't know if we'll get how far we'll get before Raise Up Oregon goes out, but I think it is something that we're going to be focused on for the next couple of years.
Yeah. And, it may be an example where the private sector, such as the third bullet there, plus these others that Kali suggested, are kind of taking the lead and not waiting for the state to have the capacity to try to focus on it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for partnership. I think there is a lot of value in the fact that the early learning and kindergarten guidelines are jointly owned by us and ODE. I know a lot of K-12 leaders do reference it, particularly when they are starting their own preschool programs. So I think finding that balance of bringing in community, bringing in those advocacy partners, and keeping this as a state-owned document is going to be part of the process.
Okay, good point. So Remy, why don't you capture some of that it will be an opportunity on the guidelines, maybe for there to be some public-private partnership work around those. And then, of course, there are many other private organizations, and you can pull them out of Kali's email.
Yeah, and Sue, if I could just say, both on the P3 alignment and the preschool and literacy, our foundation is funding a lot of those organizations, like as many as we can find across the state. And so if you're looking for specific people or organizations, we basically fund most of them. So, so happy to help to find panelists and people to speak.
That would be awesome, Anne. Thank you. Yeah, no, if we could lean on you to help set that up, that would be great. Thanks. And do you think we can do that this spring, Anne? Or do you have any sense of that?
I think I would need to talk to my esteemed colleagues. I think spring will be hard, but we could do it by the summer, I think.
Okay. Okay. We'll be in touch to try to figure that one out.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Once again, philanthropy is a great partner. Oh my gosh. Okay, anything else on public education happening at ODE? Okay, let's move on to health. So the whole, Medicaid waiver, incredibly exciting. So we hope we can get an update on that sometime this spring. We'll see with the legislature in town. All of these state updates are going to be tough. And then there are lots of regional health initiatives. OPIP is just one of myriad ones. So I'm not sure exactly how we might try to identify other specific ones. If you all are involved in any that you would suggest, or if you have ideas of what we might do with those regional initiatives.
I know that our region's starting work again on the community health assessment, community health improvement plan process, the CHA and the CHIP. And I think it's important that early childhood be included.
Okay, let's, that would be under regional health initiatives, right? So
Yep.
the community health improvement project.
Community health assessment, and then the community health improvement plan.
And I assume that's for all CCOs or the whole state, Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is happening throughout the state, and there certainly are conversations in our county involving how that affects early childhood Although that may not be separated out specifically. I think there's been a big emphasis, particularly on the social emotional part of things and services that are available regarding moving in a positive manner towards that.
The other health factor, I think, on the statewide level is the CCO metric on social emotional learning. It's already listed down there. There it is. Great.
It's there. Yeah, and we pulled out social emotional just because it's bigger than health, OHA, but obviously it's a huge topic. And if you read Kali's email, you know that she asked the question of whether we should try to form a work group, partly focused on Raise Up Oregon, but to look at how do we really integrate behavioral health in pretty much everything that happens in early childhood. And I'm not sure what a work group would look like. Obviously, it would need to at least partly be staffed by OHA, not by DELC. So whether they would see value in that. Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how we get our hands around this behavioral health piece. The infant early childhood mental health consultation program, you may remember that used to be called the suspension expulsion program. So this is a more positive name, is to be a consultation program. So we can get an update on that in May.
And
And
Sue,
then-
I think on
yeah.
the behavioral health front, I mean, we know that Governor Kochak has named behavioral health as a priority. So I think there's more to come there and an opportunity to understand what her vision is and work with that team. And then I wanted to clarify too on the infant early childhood mental health consultation, that's one of the main strategies, but we'll still be leveraging technical assistance, coaching, and those kind of softer approaches, and not just focusing on mental health consultation, because we know that's not going to meet the variety of needs of our providers and our kids in care.
Okay, good clarification, Alyssa, thanks. Yes, and the governor's made it very clear that this is a high priority for her. So where the council can fit in and support that, I guess is sort of the unknown at this point. Yeah. I actually have a conversation scheduled with the governor on Friday, so that's on my list of questions. Yeah. And this OHA System of Care Advisory Council, you all may well be aware of that already, that I wasn't, but once again, I'm going to meet with their staff in 2 weeks, I think, to find out how we can work with them on an early childhood agenda and focus. So I think a part of our role is just to look at these, myriad advisory groups and say, we want to make sure early childhood is a part of your agenda.
So I met with former Rep. Williams, who's now their executive director of the advisory council. She's very focused on early childhood.
Oh, good. So you're familiar with that advisory council, Peter?
It was a revelation to me. She called up and said, "Hey, can we talk? I got a new job." And I said, "I didn't even know there was an advisory council." That's okay, great.
Yeah, I found out about it at the agency implementation team meeting. The Bill Blaney from ODHS asked if I was on it, and I said, "On what?" So,
Yeah, former Rep. Anna Williams.
Anna Williams. Awesome.
I don't know if this fits here or anywhere, but the ODE is working on their K-12 social emotional learning standards that are going to be kind of out there a couple years from now. And so, you know, I wonder about the implications for early learning. I was part of the first group, the committee that worked on those standards. And one of the interesting features of those standards is they aren't just child level indicators around like, what should children be doing and how should they be demonstrating their social and emotional growth and development, but it's also they have standards for the adults and what the adults should be thinking about and doing, which I think is a powerful construct. So could be something for us to think about.
And Subin, you said that they're developing those now, is that right?
Yeah, so there were two committees put together. The first one was just to kind of give recommendations on the overall framework of the standards. That was the one I participated in. And then there's a committee that's working right now to actually develop the standards. So I don't really have any direct insight into how those are shaping up. But what the first group provided was just the structure and the framework for how we wanted those standards to be laid out.
Awesome. Yeah, Remy, let's definitely find out about that. Super. Thanks, Subin. Anything else on this huge topic about behavioral health? We know it impacts everything.
The only comment I'd make is we could focus on this every meeting, the workforce and social emotional health. And
just going to bring up that same thing, that I think workforce is huge there. And I know we've talked about workforce development, but that's going to take some time, I think.
Yes, you're right. That is definitely a barrier. Okay, let's go on to housing. Co-location. So once again, at the agency implementation team, we heard from Mitch at the Housing Authority about an RFP that they're putting out for this co-location of affordable housing. We're looking for a CDFI to take the lead on it. So he said that he thought by May they would have an update that they could bring to the council. So that will be very exciting. We listed the Housing Stability Council again as maybe a touch point for us at some point, so they know what we're doing and maybe they'd have input on Raise Up Oregon for us. And then we put in rural facilities just because we know it's a huge need. It's needed everywhere, but we thought we'd call out rural. Anything else council wants to put in on human services? I mean, sorry, on housing. All right. Human services. Yep. Okay. I've got to move faster. So family preservation, great initiative of theirs. The Children's Public-Private Partnership that I'm involved in. Maybe we'll do a presentation on that. It's focused on foster care and getting kids and families reunited faster. And then ODHS may well have information they want to bring to us on how their self-sufficiency programs intersect with lots of other programs listed there. And that, once again, many of these will be driven by our agency partners in saying, we'd love to come and talk to you about X, whatever it might be. Business and philanthropy, we put that in as kind of a new section. We know that they're critical for this childcare supply, and Katie has certainly been a leader in that. shared service alliances. I know philanthropy has funded a lot of research and efforts in that arena. Micro centers is something Katie has talked about over in Bend. So other thoughts about business and philanthropy? Yeah, Anne.
Yeah, and there's also the small business development centers at the community colleges and the workforce in the economic development districts also have supports for childcare businesses. So there are other institutions that are doing this kind of support that we could bring into the discussion.
Awesome. Remy, will you list those bullets? And they'll go under the childcare supply, Remy.
So it's
Admittedly, I got distracted by an email. Would you mind repeating?
yeah,
what you-
small business development centers and economic development district supports for childcare businesses.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any other additions to this, once again, very broad topic?
Sue, I might suggest that we'd need to think about bringing in like DLCD or DCBS. You know, I think the micro centers concept that most folks think about, there's going to be some significant zoning barriers, not licensing rule barriers. So just a flag that we'll probably need to broaden the table to actually realize some of these ideas.
Excellent point. And there's a bill in the legislature to set a work group up to do that. Remy, why don't you pop back up to under ECE childcare, and let's just put in probably DLCD as another, yeah, because of their land use. And actually, is that what yeah, I think that is what the bill's about. Okay, thanks, Alyssa. Good point. Okay, back to business and philanthropy. We could add a whole lot more. I think 2 sessions ago, or last full session, philanthropy put together a report of the many ways in which they have supported early childhood in the state. So why don't we, and that would be not just childcare, but early childhood programming. So let's put that in this expand services and just pull that report back up, Remy. It was on philanthropy's support of early childhood in Oregon. I think it was 2021, maybe. Okay, system elements, Raise Up Oregon. We know we're going to see that at every meeting, or literally. Home visiting system, we're going to get an update in just a few minutes from Peg and Peter. Parenting education, OPEC is certainly a leader. You all may want to add a couple other bullets under parenting education. And then, yeah. Yeah.
One of the things about parenting education and OPEC that's going on now is a real intentional effort to make sure that they are reaching diverse populations, and that's really a priority for this sort of round of expansion. And so the attention to making sure that things are culturally relevant and specific is something that's interesting and might be worth us learning about.
Great. So we should invite Shauna or whomever to come and give us an update on OPEC. Anything else on parenting education from anyone? Okay, we'll move on then. Early learning hubs. We'll hear about their community engagement work in May. And then we just listed some of the regional organizations, agencies that they either do or hopefully will be connecting with. And those are from all of our different partner agencies. So it was, yeah, just an interesting listing of how you get things done on the ground with the hubs.
So a question that I have about the early learning hubs is how this association that's formed is working, what its intentions are, what its goals are, how it's working, and how they expect it to work over time, and whether the association provides anything more for us as an early learning council to work with and leverage.
Great idea. Let's add their association as another bullet, Remy. And we'll ask them to come and give us an update. Great idea. Okay. Partnerships with COBs or CBOs, sorry. We know that more and more we're working with the community-based organizations. They're doing important work in delivering services, but also in advocacy for early childhood programs. So we could list dozens of CBOs, but at this point, I think we'll just hold off and wait and see. So timing, which is everything. Deployment of federal and state program funds, sort of a reference to procurement challenges that we've had. I think all agencies have had, but wanting to make sure that we as a council stay on top of that. And I know Alyssa has told us in the past that things are better. Is that still correct, Alyssa?
Yes, things are better. Much improvement as we finally built our procurement team out, and we have a fully staffed team working on process and procedure development. So we'll be in a better place to make sure dollars are going out the door in a timely fashion.
Great. Good. Just in time for hopefully some new dollars coming in. Okay. And then legislative session.
So
Yes.
Can I go back to the federal funds?
Oh, yeah.
During the retreat, we also talked about preservation of federal funds, and I don't know that that's intended for this particular topic, but I don't want that to be lost. And when talking about that, we were referencing it had a lot to do with coordinated enrollment, and which I like to call coordinated recruitment rather than coordinated enrollment, but just that we need to be mindful of, and our strategies need to be considerate of the jeopardy to the federal dollars if we have slots that remain vacant for extended periods of time. Yeah. So I don't know that that was really in line with the intent of, well, this is around procurement, that's a different topic, but I didn't want it to get lost because I don't see it referenced here anywhere.
Yep. No, you're right, Angie. Good catch. And we can just change it from preservation of and deployment of federal and state program funds. So why don't we do that, Remy? And yeah, over there. Because you're right, we better preserve them so we have something to deploy.
If I could just add something to that, is I think it goes back to your and my discussion prepping for this meeting. It's the system of distribution and getting it out quickly, and being especially for childhood early childhood funds for oh God, I'm forgetting the acronym for work-based. Help me.
ERDC.
Thank you, ERDC funds, and specifically, and also just funds to providers, to being more efficient in getting those out the door. Just being super sensitive to a lot of phone calls I got from folks who didn't get the funds they knew were there in a timely fashion. So, that goes also for background checks and some of the other issues that we've had over the last few years, but specifically for deployment of funds, is making it doing what we need to do to make that more efficient, easy to access, and gets in the hands of people who need it quickly.
And Katie, we've hired an outreach coordinator on the procurement team, and their whole job is going to be going out into community and finding out what barriers they've experienced in the past so that we can adjust our internal processes and procedures, at least for the Department of Early Learning and Care. And I think a lot of opportunity to share lessons learned there as we're creating our own processes and procedures and infrastructure. So that's a key part of kind of the team we've built around procurement in particular, and making sure that the rest of our teams know timelines, forms, kind of process, which has really been inconsistent and ever changing historically.
Great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alyssa. Okay, I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so thank you for going through this work plan, as obviously it's going to be a work in progress, and it will give us some direction and guidelines for future council meetings. So thank you. Thank you very much. And now we're going to turn this over to our fearless co-chairs of the Home Visiting System Committee, Peter and Peg. And Peter, you're muted, so.
Thanks, Sue. Remy, would you like to bring up the slides for the home visiting information?
Yes, just a second.
Just on an overall note, the working team has continued to do great work. Christy's been a great consultant for the effort. We were able to provide the recommendations at our last meeting. And I think Peg and I just wanted to keep people caught up with what is happening as we're moving forward.
Okay. Oh. Share. Here we go. Cool.
And we can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So Peg, how about I take this one, you take the next one, we just trade off? That work with you? So again, just to remind folks, the committee's charter was to advance the development of the statewide comprehensive home visiting service network by generating sustaining momentum for a coordinated, equitable system, engaging responsible state agencies and their partners in development and implementation, and ensuring effective collaboration on governance and administration across government entities, funders, and home visiting partners.
This just sort of outlines the progress to date. We talked about this a little bit the last meeting, that meetings began in August. There was a sort of 3 data analysis that took place. In September was that sort of family parent experience. In October, sort of focusing on the home visiting workforce. And then in November, we looked at home visiting systems. And then we got feedback on that phase 1 from both families and parents, and used the findings from all 3 of those phases and the parent feedback to then establish some recommendations. Next slide.
So again, the North Star is state support for the home visiting system and the framework for local decision-making and implementation. The language focused on what is needed to strengthen home visiting coordination, not the how, who, or when. The recommendations were organized not in priority order, except recommendation A, financial and workforce and then structures. And I think we have a link to the recommendations that was on the agenda. You can go next slide.
So it's sort of as a result of those things, and again, I think some of the recommendations are they're available, I think, in the packet if people need to review those. But there were some early opportunities that were identified that hopefully could be acted on if within the next 12 months or so. And one of them was investing in relationships. And a sort of an example of that was the Ford Family Foundation's experience in funding convening and networking opportunities. And allowing the building of trust between different programs for people to learn about what other programs we're doing and so forth. A big key is going to be to begin identifying agency and private partners to align some funds for an FTE position, kind of like what we've done for Christie's funding to be our consultant in this work. And then reflective supervision and ongoing training. There's some opportunities that are already in place, but we may need to explore that a little bit more. The family leadership, there's a lot of regions and programs that already have these in place, but we need to identify them, and that's really one of the things that came up as we need to get more data on that. And then obviously outreach and messaging. There's been some research on how to best reach families and so forth, and positively mention or message home visiting, and we need to explore some of that. The high priority arrow really is the issue of trying to get funding going, because we really need to explore getting that FTE person on board so that we can move this work forward.
Peg, this is Ann. Can I just ask about that? Is the hope that the various agencies would sort of co-fund a position like that?
That probably in conjunction with some private philanthropy, yes. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of the options that are available to us. And we're sort of in that exploratory phase right now of looking at who has money and who is willing to part with a little of that.
Great, thanks.
And I think the discussion is really centered on the need to have one person who's focused on this full time.
Yeah. Yeah. Next slide, I guess.
So for January and February, the home visiting system working team and the committee are identifying elements that contribute to successful planning processes. Because again, we got to go through that process of determining the how, etc. We want to shine a light on existing resources and needed resources, and then begin outline action planning processes. So we can end up with an action plan on all this, hopefully with a FTE included to help drive the process. Next slide.
And we looked at kind of what makes a successful planning process. And this was kind of brainstorming between Peter and I and the co-chairs of the working team and Christy and Sue. And we kind of came up with these common shared or these common elements for the planning process. And one is to be sure that we're all clear on the common understanding of the desired outcome, that we really need to develop trust with clear communication, what individuals' roles are, their responsibilities, and then follow through with those. Again, that need for dedicated funding for that FTE, as well as some facilitation support and a budget to support some convenings across the state to develop some of those relationships or strengthen them. We need a realistic timeline. We don't want to go too fast because that tends to leave people out. And we don't want to go too slowly because then you never get to action and it loses momentum. We need some effective tools. And that's, again, where that relevant data comes in. We really need to know what programs are out there now. And we need some flexible and effective planning protocols. And then we need people power, which is inclusive of people that are experts, some consumers, providers, evaluators, and funders of home visiting. And this is where we'd like to open it up a little bit to discussion amongst the council if anyone has any other suggestions or areas that they think we should emphasize in this sort of planning process. Yeah, sure, Katie.
So when you talk about realistic timelines, I also think you need to include timelines and goals or outcomes.
Like short-term goals?
Yeah, short-term for sure, long-term as stretch goals. But that I always find to be, I like the fact you're talking about realistic timelines, but what are the outcomes for those timelines as well that you're shooting for?
And I agree with you. I think that helps to, if you have a sort of a timeline that you need to meet those expectations. Yeah. Good point.
Could I just also ask, maybe this is a similar kind of question, about ensuring that there's sort of shared purpose and vision across the state agencies? Are you thinking that there would be a formal memorandum of understanding or something that would indicate their commitment and buy-in to this process?
I don't know that came up so much as we really want to be sure that we're true to what the vision of this being, and that is really more about collaboration and a systems-wide thing, keeping in mind that North Star of this. These are really going to be regional kinds of things or community-run kinds of things just with state support.
I'm very, I think you are absolutely right about this. We call it the process product tension. You want the buy-in, but if you don't get, and people will buy, so you want it to be collaborative, but you don't want it to be so process oriented that you don't get to outcomes and product, and then people drop off because they don't see any value in being part. So it's that timing and making sure that you get commitments and building the trust while also getting outcomes is a really tricky balance to find. And it's always, you're always kind of adjusting along the continuum, because sometimes you get too far into the process and not enough product and people drop off. Sometimes you push too hard for product and people say, hey, wait, I don't know, I didn't know this. So I think the clearer that we can be about the expectations for agencies at the state level, as well as what happens on the ground level, that will serve us well in managing that process product tension.
Yeah, great, thanks. Anything else?
Both Anne and Katie's comment merged together in my brain to the tension between process and product and the idea of having goals. I think when Katie was talking about kind of having these long-term goals, but also some immediate goals, something I've done with groups that has been helpful is have process goals around like who should be in attendance, how long should this part take, how much funding does this phase need versus this phase, and just not to slow down or belabor the process, but to give everyone an idea of it's not, we feel like the process is just as important as what we're trying to reach at the end. And so putting those into some sort of visible format for people to see has been helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything else? All right, well, thanks you guys. We appreciate that feedback. And Peter, I think there's one more slide.
Let's see. Is there one more slide, Rennie? There it is. So in the works, there are discussions taking place about what type of funding could possibly come from different agencies. We want to identify a neutral capacitated, what a great word, backbone to house the position. And we want to create a realistic timeline for the longer term planning and faster movement on the early opportunities. And Susan, I think your idea of putting goals into the process is a really good idea. Where do we want to be when in the process? We have had some discussions already. We looked at the OPEC model as a neutral holding of parent education, and we're even actually we're able to have a discussion with their leadership, which is positive. Talking about they want to be helpful and also discuss how this can all come together. So I think the committee is very open to having discussions on who that neutral backbone might be, and wanting to clarify it once we get some options, clarify for the council, clarify for our partner organizations to make sure people are positive about having a backbone. So we're in that process right now. And Sue or Peg, I don't know if you want to add anything on that.
The only thing I would add is I think we're in that fact-finding phase right now where we're kind of looking for sources of funding. And then again, we'll look at kind of where that's all going to be housed. But yeah, I don't, and Sue, do you have more to say about that?
Well, I would just say, a lot has been done in a relatively short amount of time. If you consider the fact this really got active and started in about August. So we've come a long way. Both Peg and Peter have talked about wanting to maintain the momentum behind this, which is why we're in conversations now with our state agency partners, and we'll need to be with philanthropy as well to say, how can we fund this one full-time, very focused position on coordination? And this funding would not be to enhance services or any model. It would be to coordinate these efforts, which we certainly know from the Ford family's 6 years of experience is sort of the critical piece.
Yeah. I just want to join in with that and say, first of all, thank you, Peter, Sue, and Peg for pushing this forward. I mean, really a lot has been done. I totally agree there needs to be an FTE to be the sort of the backbone to keep this agenda moving forward. And I'm going to venture that philanthropy would be willing to do some funding, but wouldn't want to would expect to see state agency buy-in in the form of funding. And so that philanthropy would certainly not do it all by any means, in part because it would be kind of a sign of buy-in if the agencies were helping to fund. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yes. Subin, did you have your hand up or not? No, sorry.
You're celebrating.
Yay. Yes, so in February, the committee, Home Visiting System Committee, will be bringing a report to us, I think, Peter and Peg, if I'm correct, sort of outlining what is the process for moving forward and answering some of the questions that you all raised and the points that were on that process slide, the last slide. So we will be hearing from them again at our next meeting. Okay, anything else, Peter and Peg?
Nope.
Nope, thanks.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Great morning. Appreciate all of the input and conversation. We're going to take a half-hour lunch break, and then we're going to start at 12:30 with public testimony. We've had one gentleman, Jeff Myers, sign up to speak. And then we will be moving on with other legislative updates and then lots of DELC updates. So that's it. We'll see you at 12:30. Thank you. Mhm. All right. Good afternoon and hello again, council members. Looks like we are all back. Hope you all had a nice lunch or run around the block or whatever you do in between meetings. Okay, we are going to start this afternoon with our public testimony. And we have one gentleman who has signed up to speak, Mr. Jeff Myers. And I can see from his box on that it's Save Our Schools. And we'd like to welcome you, Mr. Myers, to the Early Learning Council meeting. I think Remy has told you that we ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes. And we are excited to see you and ready to listen to you. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I will do my best to keep within the 3 minutes. Well, thank you all. So my name is Jeff Myers, as you see there. I'm a parent of 2 school-age kids in Beaverton. And while I don't have children in any early learning programs anymore, this is still an area that I care deeply about. Along with my roles as dad and husband, I'm also an advocate for all children, educators, childcare providers, and others in communities across the state. Today, I'm here to call out the proverbial elephant in the room. The Early Learning Division and its leaders are failing those they are charged to serve. I realize that's a pretty big and broad claim, and I'll do my best to give you a couple of examples in the brief amount of time I have. So back on September 19th, 2022, you may have seen the Fox News article that highlighted the fraud, waste, and abuse in the Preschool Promise program in fall 2019 through spring of 2021. Tens of millions of dollars were wrongly paid to providers for effectively empty seats. These were Preschool Promise slots that went unfilled, yet ELD paid them anyway. And to my knowledge, there were no attempts by ELD to address the under-enrollment and enforce the policies and the grant agreements that every provider had signed. Now, the very next day, articles from the Oregonian and other sources called out the delays in starting the preschool year due to contracting and other issues. And then the following week, there was another article on Preschool Promise waste by KATU. Now, rolling back the clock a bit again, in September 21st, 2022, the ELD director did provide a response regarding the Preschool Promise issues and addressed questions in the House Interim Committee on Early Learning meeting. She claimed these payments were done following other federal and state agencies who provided funds to stabilize the childcare industry during the pandemic. However, there is no evidence to support this claim. It was a quickly and poorly constructed lie to cover up the massive failures in leadership, execution, and ethics. Now, the next example, I'm sure many of you are aware of, is ELD's inability to do one of the most basic tasks they are responsible for, and that's processing applications for the Central Background Registry. So I've heard from many providers who are beyond frustrated with the delays, which regularly go beyond 2 months with little to no communication. With all the talk about childcare and preschool deserts, the Early Learning Division is the one blocking passionate people across the state from addressing this problem. Now, these are just 2 examples of how broken this organization is, and these are likely part of the reason ELD is having difficulty retaining existing staff and attracting new people to fill all these open positions they now have. And this just further exacerbates the problems that they have. Now, in closing, I want to point out that these are not issues I see on the agenda today, nor have I seen these mentioned in presentations given to legislators in recent meetings. The leaders in ODE and ELD just want to keep pushing for new programs and more funding, but they appear to have no interest in delivering on those commitments or doing the core jobs they are supposed to do. So my ask of you is simple. Please hold this organization accountable for the work they are supposed to do. And until they can demonstrate that they can do the work that has already been committed, there should be no new programs or projects entertained from their wish list. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I would definitely appreciate time to discuss further if you wish. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Myers, for taking time to join us today. And we appreciate you sharing your concerns. And we are working closely with our agency director and her staff to address any concerns that we hear from the public. So we appreciate you letting us know what you're concerned about.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Council, you know from our packets that we had two written testimonies that came in, also related to the CBR, the background checking process. And I believe we have Alicia here, Alicia Gardner. And I'd love to have Alicia just take a couple of minutes. And since it's also one of the issues that Mr. Myers mentioned, if you could update us on where we are with that process. We know we've had challenges in getting record checks completed. So Alicia, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. And my name is Alicia Gardner. I am the Office of Child Care Director. My division oversees the Central Background Registry. So for the background checks, first of all, I want to start off by saying that we are deeply concerned on the impact that the delays in our background check is having on programs and their ability to serve families, and having the ability for Oregonian families to access care. We know that this is the most critical piece and foundational piece in getting people to work. So we are treating it with immense urgency and top priority within OCC. I wanted to provide an update to you regarding where we're at today with the backlog, and starting off with just a little bit of history on how we got here. In February of 2022, both Senate Bill 1545 and House Bill 4005, I think it's 1547, that might be an error. They required personnel from unlicensed facilities to enroll in the CBR from both recorded programs and regulated subsidy programs. So this effectively added thousands of new individuals into our central background registry. In August of 2022, we also had a compounded issue on that our 5-year renewals, which started 5 years prior, started to renew in 2022 fall. In addition, in fall of 2022, our background check unit was significantly short-staffed with the positions that we had, with only 4 out of 11 of the positions, or sorry, with 4 out of the 11 positions vacant. Since that point in time, we have been working extremely hard to get new positions in place using vacancy savings, as well as the funded positions that came from Senate Bill 1547 and 4005. And as of today, in January, we have 37 positions in both the customer service, intake, and background units. So in doing that, we have gone and over we've effectively doubled our staffing levels within these units, and we are tracking the data on how the impact of adding these new positions is having the ability to move our background checks forward. We still have 3 more positions to hire. I'm working on recruitment for that. I will also say that the recruitment process is not quick nor easy within the state, and then also the training is pretty significant, as well as obtaining different clearances for criminal justice information. All of those things take time to get in place, and we are moving forward. And we're pretty close to having every single person in place and doing the work, with just a few positions left to get some clearances. So here's where we're at today. And I hope that this slide shows really the complexity of the work that we do within these units. We have in our intake unit 5 new individuals who are working on our new apps. So we've changed our process to prioritize any new applications that come to us today, to get those reviewed, verified for accuracy, and assigned to a background specialist. So this took effect last Friday, and we're hopeful that in doing this, we're going to effectively, for anybody who's applied from last Friday forward, stopped a 3-week delay in that intake. And then simultaneously, we have a second group who is chipping away at the backlog. So in doing this, we're working at it from both angles. I'm happy to report that in adding additional customer service staff, we are now completely caught up in our inbox and our phone calls. This was something that was also impacting us in the backlog, in that we were having difficulty in responding in time when people were inquiring. And the other thing I can report is that when we do get an inquiry for CBR status in our customer service inbox, we are working towards making sure that that person is prioritized over some of the other checks where we're not quite sure if individuals have gone to find another job, or if they're not waiting as urgently as the person who's inquiring. And you can see here in the background, we have several different staff on different areas of the team. We are approaching this at all angles. We're tracking data weekly, and we're hoping and projecting that in the next couple of weeks, we will know and be able to determine if these staffing levels are the appropriate levels to really absorb the amount of checks that we're getting on a daily basis.
So given all this, this is great. A lot of progress made since last summer. Do you have a rough estimate of how long it's taking now for once someone submits their application until the background check is completed?
Yeah, great question. So as of right now, it's really only been since last week that we've got a really good system going to track the data that we need to track, in that how are we seeing movement in the intake team as well as the background team. It will take us a couple weeks to see the people that we've started processing in this way as of last Friday, to see if we've really made any difference in our approach. But as of right now, we're still looking at applications from December. The majority of our applications have come in from December. So there is still quite a delay. But again, we started this new system because only last week is really when we had all of our new teammates trained, ready to go and jump in with the work. So I'm feeling like we're going to see some movement here within the next couple of weeks, and knowing just how much of an impact adding all these different staff in this approach is.
Great, thank you.
So Alicia, does that mean that right now, understanding you've got new staff who are just getting started, but the wait has been about 6 or 8 weeks then, if these are from December?
That is correct.
And what's the goal? What's your target?
That's another really great question. So, I think I came last month to kind of show and present to you all, and I can go back on this slide over here on our operational improvements for CBR. Right now, we're working with a very old computer system where the data points that we would really like to collect are quite frankly, not what we need to track CBR in its modern form the way it is today. So what I could speak to is, for example, in 2015, we didn't have fingerprinting. In 2015, we didn't have out-of-state checks. And so in adding those things per our CCDF requirement, our federal requirement, we've also not been able to update our computer programs as well or as effectively as we can in this matter. But the good news is we have launched a project and obtained resources in order to build those data points in. So that work is ongoing and set to be worked on in the next few months or so. So we're really going to be able to pull out really good data points. And to answer your question, Peter, I think that's going to inform us on just when we have the prime movement of a check, exactly how long is it really taking and what is the standard we should set? I will say that I also have plans to set this as a KPM so we can look and track this effectively at the highest level and always understand where we're at with our background checks and how we can achieve ensuring in the future that individuals are able to go to work when they apply for the CBR. They have everything they need to move through the process quickly.
So is there like a national standard or kind of an industry standard? Should it take a week from the time they contact you till they're approved, or 2 weeks or 4?
Right now on our website, we report that it takes 2 weeks, and that was prior analysis that we had done with the fingerprinting analysis. We are working towards getting to that level. We still want to do another analysis on that. I will say for the national level, it's challenging only because every state runs things so differently and has different subject individuals in their background checks and gets their background checks from different places. So every state system is run a little bit differently, so it's hard to speak to the kind of national averages on this.
Okay, but it sounds like 2 weeks is sort of your targets.
That's what we're hoping to get to, as long as our data is showing, you know, with adding in these new data points is showing that that's realistic. And of course that does count into if an individual gets their fingerprint letter, are they able to get their fingerprinting done that same day?
Right. No, I understand the process has gotten more complex in the last several years. Okay, thank you, Alicia, for another update. And thanks for the work that you're doing, filling those positions and training your new staff has obviously been a very top priority for you. So congratulations on almost being filled.
Thank you.
So can I just ask, when we get public testimony like that, do we reply to the people? Like, will Jeff Myers get this report or anything about this?
Well, my hope is that Jeff is still live streaming this, so he actually heard it. He's no longer, you know, a presenter.
But he could be listening. Okay, great.
Yeah, and we could suggest to him, because Remy's got his email, that he listened to the tape of this part of the meeting if he didn't happen to stay online. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks, Alicia. Now we will go back to the presentations that are actually on our agenda. And I'm excited that we have one on, we'll start with, I'm not doing that. We'll start with Spark. We've heard about Spark. We've known about Spark for years, and it will be exciting to have an update on this. So Ashley, I'd like to welcome you to the Early Learning Council meeting. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chair Miller and members of the Early Learning Council. For the record, my name is Ash Michaels, pronouns they, them, and I'm the Spark specialist on the professional learning system team. I'm happy to provide you with a Spark redesign update. I have some slides prepared.
Great.
I was hoping that Remy would help with that.
Okay, Remy.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
So in my presentation, I'll be covering how the redesign supports Raise Up Oregon, how we'll approach the redesign, an overview of redesign stages and timeline, as well as a progress report of what has happened and what to expect in the next 3 months. So on this slide, as you can see, it's illustrating the connection to Raise Up Oregon. And as many of you know, Raise Up Oregon, I guess I'll call it 1.0, includes the following objective: that families have access to high quality, defined as culturally responsive, inclusive, and developmentally appropriate, affordable early care and education. And I believe this, oh, sorry, that's my alarm to make sure I'm in here. I believe this objective may be carried forward into Raise Up Oregon 2.0, which is wonderful news. So in Raise Up Oregon 1.0, one strategy listed for this objective is to improve infrastructure. And part of that is Spark, which is our state's quality recognition and improvement system. It was formerly known as our quality rating and improvement system, and that name changed via House Bill 2059, and it also removes the requirement for rating tiers. So a little bit about how it's currently operating as a rating system. It offers a way for programs to evidence their level of quality in the domains of children's learning and development, health and safety, personnel qualifications, family partnerships, and administration and business practices. So that's how it's currently operating. But back to the slide, one recommendation in particular from Raise Up Oregon was to expand resources for Spark to support additional ECE providers, including family, friend, and neighbor caregivers, which often are called license exempt. However, the current structure of Spark isn't well suited to accommodate this expansion. It doesn't currently accept license exempt. Those are those family, friend, and neighbor caregivers, with the exception of those license exempt settings run through K-12. And in addition, current standards were really intended to be applicable to specific setting types. So if we were to increase eligibility to include license exempt without looking at our Spark system through an equity lens, both for the standards and for the supports available, really how the system functions overall, we're likely to perpetuate inequities and not effectively support license exempt providers, which we certainly don't want to do. We want it to be successful. So even before 2021, we've been looking closely at the data that we have, including those who are applying for Spark, who's receiving 3, 4, 5-star ratings, looking at the trends, sorry, and what it tells us about who is supported to reach these achievements and who is not. So in 2015, I think it actually went into 2016, Western Oregon University, the Research Institute, did some intentional engagement and gathered input from the field about the current Spark structure and how to improve it. And as part of that outreach, they were able to identify some inequities and barriers. And one common thing that was often said is that there's insufficient supports to meet the standards and specifically financial supports. There are, in the current system, you're allowed one-time support funds, and programs are saying it's just not adequate to meet all of the standards. And families said that the ratings weren't meaningful to them. It didn't explain the differences between programs. So even if you had like 2 5-star rated programs, you wouldn't really know much unique differences about the two besides maybe their time of operation, like what days they're open. And so it didn't really give them that information that they really need to know in order to help pick the program that is the best fit for their child and family. It's just a lot of those wonderful, unique things were kind of hidden within those ratings. So another great thing from families was that they pointed out that standards were missing an emphasis on culturally appropriate and responsive care. So we definitely want to address that, right? More data. In 2017, there was a validation study done on Spark, which revealed little to no difference in child outcomes within 3, 4, and 5-star rated programs. So that's a problem. Doesn't mean that great things weren't happening in these programs. They were. They're just not able to see the difference between those 3, 4, and 5-star rated programs. So in addition to data, we've been digging into research and definitely have been focusing on equity and how to create equitable systems. One of the things I'm happy to report is that nationally, there is a shift away from rating to focusing on supporting improvement. So basically, they're dropping the R for rating and focusing on creating quality improvement systems that often include more of an emphasis on continuous quality improvement cycles, as opposed to like reaching their star rating and being done, but more of a how do we continually reflect, learn and grow to meet the needs of the children, the families, and to stabilize the business. So that's the good news. Some of the unfortunate research is that depending on the design of the quality rating and improvement system, it can actually increase inequities across program types. So part of that is how those systems provide more funds to higher rated programs through incentives and higher monthly payments instead of providing financial supports in an equitable manner. So with all of that and more, it became quite clear that minor tweaks and improvements wouldn't be sufficient. And so a redesign was necessary. Next slide, please. So here you can see this is our redesign approach. And our objective is to really redesign Spark to become even more equitable, inclusive, and accessible, and be a system that supports adults caring for young children, no matter what setting they're in, to continuously improve their practices. And because Spark is not only for programs and providers, it's also for families. So we want to make sure that the redesigned Spark does a better job of assisting families in finding early care and education services that are the best fit for their child. So it really provides programs the opportunity to highlight or spotlight what is unique about them and how it might be the best fit for a family. So our strategy to do this is we'll be utilizing a collaborative redesign process with the intentional engagement of historically underserved and underrepresented populations. And this is the part that I'm most excited about, is that it will be driven by the leadership of families and the early care and education workforce. So more details to come. Next slide, please. Okay, so here there's the 4 stages of the redesign process. Down along the bottom, you can see a bit of the time frame. And I want to point out that this is all 2023. And the reason why it's set to end in December of 2023 is because it's funded by PDG, and those funds need to be spent by then. The good news is that that money is able to cover the engagement and the redesign plan, but the implementation of the redesign, even though it has this little box here for implement design, I'll explain a little bit more in a second, that we actually have the ability to carry forward the implementation after the December deadline using separate funds to support that. So let's look a little bit closer at each of the stages. We'll start with statewide engagement, and it does have a box for a time frame, but I want you to be able to understand that we've intentionally created engagement throughout this whole process, and so it doesn't actually end in June. But this is the easiest way to kind of break this up to show like how the focus is from this to this to this. So statewide engagement will be focused on listening to families and providers, and we will be centering those who are most impacted by the Spark system. So we want to hear what they want and need from Spark to increase their quality, of course, in a way that aligns with their program's philosophy, beliefs, cultures, and is relevant and meaningful to them. So this is why they will have the opportunity to be hired for participatory action research, sometimes called a PAR, listening and design teams. So essentially the listening and design teams, they become paid researchers, and they go out into their communities and they gather data via surveys, interviews, and focus groups, with the goal really being to empower them to design a system that supports continuous quality improvement efforts that we believe will increase the availability and accessibility of high quality early care and education experiences for children across Oregon, no matter what setting they're in. So as the focus of this statewide engagement will have at the very end a synthesis report, which is basically all of the data that they gather, right? And that report is going to carry forward into the next stage, which is the redesign stage. So again, those same listening and design teams get to use that data they collected, analyze it, and make recommendations on how to redesign Spark, with the ability to continue to engage those that are still interested to help with the co-development of a formal redesign plan. So that more or less is like an order request, like this is what we want to receive, and then that is passed off to the Spark team at the Research Institute at Western Oregon University, and they'll take that and say, all right, this is what we need to do in order to make this happen, right? So they'll basically work some time out to really outline how they're going to implement this plan and who they need to bring in, and what we're intending to happen is that it'll be a phased implementation. So they'll kind of break it up into what can we accomplish within this 6 months period, and this, and just outline how they're going to make it happen. Along in the same kind of time frame as that, we hope to stay engaged with the listening and design teams. And those that are interested, we would love for them to move forward into an accountability team. And I'm also really excited about this because it will offer them a space to co-develop an ongoing process for assessing and improving Spark, so that this engagement is not a one and done, right? This is ongoing, and this is creating the opportunity for them to hold us accountable for creating a system that really meets their needs, right? I think in addition to that, it's sending that message that we believe in continuous quality improvement, and therefore we are going to continually improve our system. And I think it's great because this really seems to be aligning with the governor's priority of accountability. Same with some of the Raise of Oregon draft principles that I saw, specifically to promote community and family leadership and decision-making in design and implementation, right? So it's really exciting to see that, and also the principle that, we need to ensure high quality implementation and continuous improvement. We need to be accountable. Also connections with how redesigning Spark will be better equipped to support, I think it was a draft objective 14, which is more or less the objective from before about increasing access to high quality early learning, but even objective 15 to improve professional learning opportunities for the full diversity of the EC workforce. So it's really exciting to see these things align. Next slide, please.
Okay, we need to kind of wrap this up pretty soon, Ash.
No problem. So what has occurred so far? September, we signed the contract, November, with Western Oregon University. And then we decided we needed a partner organization to really facilitate the engagement. They were selected, and that was Community Wealth Partners. And we chose them because their values align with our equity values. And they are the ones that use a participatory action research approach. So next slide, please. So what to expect next? In January, Community Wealth Partners will develop their engagement plan. February, we'll be advertising the listening and design team positions. And in March, we'll have 2 listening and design teams formed with families and early education workforce. And then within that, we'll have two different teams, one facilitated in Spanish and one in English, 15 members each. We're hoping to have a good representation of the state, ensuring that there's diversity within both groups, and intentional outreach to rural, tribal, persons of color, really hoping that PAR members are bilingual or multilingual. But overall, just really happy to see that they'll have the opportunity to be supported in this process and have that leadership role. In addition to this, later on in the process, there'll be focus groups that can include people from CCR&R's hubs, you all, and it'll be just a great way to keep everybody connected and involved in the process. So that's what I have for you all today. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about Spark.
All right, Ash, a lot going on with a very important program, historically important. And I think we all agree a redesign is in order. Any questions of Ash on this?
Yeah, I just want to really appreciate you for sharing this, and the timeline for especially the next few months seems really tight. Can you just reflect on that?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So the PDG funds, like I said, they're only for a certain amount of time. Some of the procurement process has slowed pieces of this down, but we still meet Community Wealth Partners intended time frame of a minimum of 3 months for the engagement of the PAR. But as I said, they continue to stay engaged over time. So it'll be several months, 6 months of engagement, and then more of the focus, the other half of the year is on implementation. And it's short. I'd love more time, but it is going to work along with Community Wealth Partners vision.
I'm all in favor of doing this
Yeah.
quickly.
I mean, I don't want it to be like quick in a blink of an eye, right? We certainly want time. And their process is a weekly meeting with these PAR teams. So they're going to really be connecting on a regular basis and getting into this, going through a collaborative change curriculum. And so it's going to be deep. It's going to be rich. Yeah.
Thanks for your leadership on this.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
And I'm glad we're compensating the parents and providers for being involved. That's obviously important. Yeah, are the hubs involved at all, Ash?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think that was probably on the slide that I went through so fast. The great thing is that I've been involving the hubs already just last week? Sometime this month, I gave a presentation to the hub directors and shared with them about this and trying to keep them informed. And they were very open to helping connect to families so that they can spread the message about this engagement and explain how amazing it is. But we have additional engagement and things scheduled so that we can keep them informed.
Great. Super. Yeah, they're an important part of the system building.
Absolutely.
Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm on my phone. I think the wireless is out in my home right now. Ash, I saw you present to the hubs. I think it was a couple weeks ago or a week ago. And thanks again for presenting today. As I'm ruminating on the idea of kind of being in this more responsive, supportive place of supporting improvement, one of the questions that I have is that I feel like that has implications for other components of the system beyond Spark. So there's CCR&R, or there's ELSI, or there's, all these other kind of supportive things, even the infant toddler mental health consultation. There's all these other components. So are they going to be part of the participatory groups, or do you think that's like a separate thread? Because I can see pros and cons to including them to the.
Great question. And nice to see you, Subin. So I think I do want to emphasize that the intensive engagement is on including those and putting them in leadership positions that are most directly impacted by Spark. So that aligns with our equity values. And from the first time I presented to the ELC, I talked about how some of the redesign principles we want to incorporate is that it's connected to the system. And so there will be a lot of work on our side to make sure that all these pieces align and there's opportunities to connect. Different people on my team have already said, oh yeah, I see a great connection point here and a great connection point there. So absolutely, we're going to continue to connect with all of those different partners and efforts. And I think we have the ability to create Spark in a way where there's like optional goal sets where programs can say like, this is really important to me, I want to pursue this. And we can connect them to the appropriate system or support that is offering that.
And my last, more of a comment than a question, is anecdotally, I've been in some communities where the rating wasn't necessarily meaningful, in that really the core issue for families was, what options do I have in my area? And so it doesn't matter what the rating is, this is what I have in my region. And so I hope that, and I think you did mention before that there's a special emphasis on the implications for rural and different regions put into the redesign.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Ash, thank you very much for joining us, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we're going to talk about ERDC, employment-related daycare. As we know, it's moving over from ODHS to DELC. Which is not for the faint of heart. I've figured that out in the last few months. So Kayla and Jordan are going to give us an overview of where we are and where we're going. So welcome.
Thank you, Sue. Perfect. I think Remy's going to pull up some slides, and just as a bit of an orientation, we wanted to take you through sort of the next 6 months or so of ELC presentations as it relates to ERDC, sort of what the agenda items will be for us to socialize with the council members, and sort of what the action is going to what actions are going to be expected of you all, which will be to adopt a rule set in June that covers the ERDC program. And then just as sort of a primer and making sure we're getting folks on the same sort of base page of who ERDC serves, how families get access to ERDC, et cetera. We have a little sort of primer presentation to orient folks to the program generally. So Remy, if you wouldn't mind just starting to click through. Okay, so in order to transfer the program successfully, rules for ERDC must be adopted by July 1st. That means in the council meeting in June, we should be adopting a whole cloth rule set for ERDC. Today, we want, like I said earlier, just want to do a primer of sort of where we're going and what the program is all about. Moving into February, we want to start bringing you content, socializing the provisions that are inside of the ERDC rule set. We're going to start sort of at the base level of what the basic definitions are, who constitutes an ERDC household, what the application process is, and what a decision notice is and why it's important. That's going to butt up right against when we start our public sort of info sessions about the fact that ERDC is moving over to DELC. We're doing a sort of 2+3 meeting structure, and we'll be previewing this publicly like on our website very soon in terms of making sure that we have sort of robust engagement around the transition. The first 2 meetings will be about what does it mean that ERDC is coming to DELC, and what will the rulemaking and engagement process around rulemaking look like in this new state of the world where ERDC is still part of the one system, but it, sort of administered and governed by ELC, the Early Learning Council, and DELC. And then the next 3 meetings, so meetings 3 through 5 of the series, will be a traditional sort of rulemaking advisory committee held jointly by ODHS because they have to repeal their rule set in order to give it to us. And so we're going to do that together, go through what ODHS will be repealing, preview what DELC will be sort of adopting in terms of the provisions, and then time for questions. And that'll be a 5-meeting series. That'll take us nicely into the March ELC meeting where we'll start talking about the nitty-gritty of actual eligibility criteria. We want to go over both financial and non-financial eligibility criteria. Moving into April, we'll start talking about the provider requirements that are in the ERDC rule set. Moving into May, we'll talk about how are childcare hours authorized and calculated. And then after that, time for questions and reviewing feedback that we got during the RAC process and the public notice process. And then in June, we'll come back with a full rule set and we'll look to adopt. So that's sort of the timeline that we're on from today to July 1 when we need that rule set adopted. And we just wanted to make sure that we're aligning on this. We have a clear path forward. You guys can see the runway. And if we need to sort of adjust or add in additional information or topics, we can start to do that now. So I'll pause here before I hand it over to Jordan, and she's going to take us into the actual sort of primer slides about ERDC and who it serves and how it functions. But any questions on sort of the runway and where we're heading?
I guess, Kayla, the one question I would have, and it may be too early because you're at the beginning of the runway. Are you anticipating any significant changes from the current ERDC rules that are currently in effect under ODHS?
That is an excellent question. Thank you, Sue. Very nicely teed up. There will be very limited policy changes in the rule set from the current state of the world. The 2 major changes, and really the only 2 we're anticipating because of the sort of limitations of how ERDC is structured within the one system, the rule set is tied really closely to the one system infrastructure. The 2 policy changes will be around a preserved true 12-month eligibility. So we're removing some of the reasons that a case could currently be closed under ERDC, and Jordan will get a little bit more into that in the following slides. The second major policy change is currently, if you're on TANF, you can't be on ERDC. And if you're on ERDC, you can't be on TANF. We're going to remove that sort of prohibition about dual eligibility and make it so that, you can be on TANF and ERDC at the same time. So Sue, those are the 2 big policy shifts that represent sort of a change from the status quo that would be included in that July 1 rule set that we adopt.
Okay, thanks. It's just good to have us know that
Yeah,
it isn't going to be some entirely new universe that
correct.
we're creating in the next
Yeah.
few months.
That's right. It's very status quo with the exception of those sort of 2 policy expansions. And those expansions are really driven by HB 3073.
Got it.
And Jordan will, she'll take you through them, I think, in a little bit more detail, but I'm going to hand it over to her now, hearing no other questions.
Okay, thanks, Kayla.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Kayla. And Remy, you can go ahead. Thank you. Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Parjetter. I am the CCDF administrator for ELD. My pronouns are she, her, and it's nice to meet you all. I know you don't have any, familiarity with me in the past, but I'll be here with Kayla presenting on these rule set changes through June. So you'll get to know me that way. So we'll go ahead and start off. Yeah. We'll go ahead and start off. I know that several of you already have familiarity with the employment-related daycare program, but we really wanted to provide just some framing and overview of the program as it exists today, given what Kayla's already spoken about, just in our intent to move the rule set over, for the most part, exactly as it is, with some significant changes via House Bill 3073. So the background on ERDC here. ERDC was formerly governed or is presently through the Oregon Department of Human Services policymaking process, but it'll be moving over to the newly created Department of Early Learning and Care on July 1st, as you all know. And it was important to us to bring this to you because future policy will be determined through the Early Learning Council and DELC rulemaking process. We're really just hoping to speak with you today about the overview of the program, kind of what Kayla already touched on, of our intent to go over future presentations on various parts of the very complicated ERDC rule set that we're hoping to make as simple as possible to clarify those rules that are being transferred over to DELC and adopted for the program's movement in July. And Remy, thank you. So ERDC, employment-related daycare, serves over 17,000 children statewide at present. That was from November 2022, which is some of the most complete recent data that we have. It serves over 10,000 families across the state, over 3,000, almost 4,000 providers that are willing to accept subsidy through the state for those payments. And the average cost per case is a little over $1,200 per case at this point in time, with an average copay per family of $1,450 per month. That latter piece is really quite a drop from past years, where a lot of times that average copay might be sitting up in the triple digits. We're really grateful for some of the changes that have happened over the last couple of years since in the aftermath of the COVID-19 state of emergency, kind of being able to restructure that copay calculation to lower it into more of a tiered structure for families that is a lot less impactful on the wallet. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Remy. ERDC helps families with the cost of childcare, and how it does that is that payments are made on behalf of that family to their chosen childcare provider. As you can see here, there's sort of an infographic of the process, which is that a family would apply for ERDC or a childcare subsidy via the one system, which also houses all sorts of other benefits available through ODHS self-sufficiency programs. If they're determined eligible, then they would report their chosen childcare provider to the ODHS direct pay unit or to their eligibility worker. I made a note down here below just that their provider does have to be listed and approved through the direct pay unit before they can receive payments. And there's kind of a separate listing process that family, friend, and neighbor providers can go through, or if they have a licensed provider who isn't already receiving subsidy or listed to receive subsidy, they can go through that process as well. Assuming that they have an approved provider and they've chosen that provider, Billing forms are then sent at the beginning of each month over to that provider on behalf of the family, and it would list out the family's eligible hours, the children on the billing form, just information around that family and that provider. And then the provider is able to submit that billing form to the direct pay unit for payment on the family's behalf. They used to have to wait until the very end of the month, but there were some policy changes that occurred within the last year that allowed families and allowed providers to submit their billing form at the beginning of the month with the anticipated hours a child was scheduled to be in care. There's a note there as well, just that payments are made up to state maximum childcare rates, and those are based on a child's age, the family's eligible hours, however many hours the provider is billing, what region of the state they live in or are providing care in, and the childcare provider type. I apologize, I'm going too fast on this. I want to make sure we're able to cover all of the content, but I also am open for questions as well. So if those come up, feel free to speak up, or I'll try to offer a pause point.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. This is good.
So in order to be eligible for the program, there are a great variety of criteria, but some of the basics here are that families have to have income beneath 200% of the federal poverty level when they first apply, or throughout their certification period, there's a higher income limit that they can earn up to. That's often referred to as the ongoing and exit income limit, and it's a combination actually of 250% of the federal poverty level or 85% of the state median income. And that really just depends on whichever is higher based on that family's size. So it's going to be the higher level of the two. But some families, like families of 7 or 8, will have like 250% of the federal poverty level. Other families will fall under 85% state median income, and families are given information about that when they're first approved. Families have to use a provider that's listed and approved for payment through the direct pay unit, which I mentioned previously. They don't have to be initially approved when the family first applies, although that's obviously helpful, but they can go through the listing process to become approved as well. Families have to be working or in school. This is an expansion of existing policy that previously required families to have income from employment specifically. The program could still support students, but they had to be working students, and their number of hours were limited by the number of hours that they were working. And that limitation no longer applies. Now the program is open to both individuals who are working and individuals who are in school in an institution eligible to receive federal financial aid. Just as a note, the student doesn't have to be receiving federal financial aid, just the school. It's also been opened up and broadened for individuals under age 20 who are completing their high school diploma or GED. So our teen parent population are also eligible for standard ERDC, where formerly they were only supported through specialized contracts across the state in limited areas. Lastly, children in care must meet citizenship requirements. There are changes underway that are being addressed via House Bill 3073, and we'll get into that later on. But that is existing policy due to constraints within one and policy changes that have not yet been made. And I believe that Remy or someone should be able to send out these slides, and there's a hyperlink there that goes to all of the additional eligibility criteria. As I mentioned, there are a few just kind of more specific ones, but these are really the big buckets that families need to be aware of. Perfect. And Remy says that these are already in the packet. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I've already kind of touched on some changes that have happened, but the program has gone through a lot of change within the last few years specifically. Several policy changes were enacted really to make care more accessible, more affordable, and these came out of both House Bill 3073 and also changes that were temporary during the COVID-19 state of emergency, but were then made permanent following that time period. Some of those areas we already talked about. Copay amounts were completely changed and revised to create a tiered structure, and it's a lot more affordable for families. As I mentioned, that average copay of $14.50 per family per month, that happened in October of 2021. I think the highest copays right now are around $130. And again, in the past, those were really getting up into astronomical numbers that families couldn't afford, and cases were often closing because the amount that the state could pay to a provider was often less than the amount of the family's copay, or the amount that they were responsible to pay first. So that is a really impactful policy change that has been made within recent years. Another change that's occurred recently is prepayment for all provider types. That was an expansion of a pilot project that actually began for just prepayment for certified centers, but it was rolled out to all provider types in July of 2021. And again, that's what I was speaking to previously about how providers can send in their billing form at the beginning of the month with those scheduled hours that they anticipate a child to be in care. That's really meant to provide more stability for the workforce, for providers and paying their staff, for more consistency with payment, all of that. There are some other changes that have occurred, such as allowance for childcare need when families work from home or telecommute. Childcare need is an area that's looked at when determining eligibility, and it's part of the rule set that we'll get into in future months. But in previous policy, families weren't able to receive ERDC when they worked from home or were telecommuting, and probably in large part due to the COVID-19 state of emergency, it became very apparent that there was an absolute childcare need for families to have childcare when they're working from home. In addition to the prepayment for all provider types, there were expansions made for providers to bill for unlimited numbers of absent days, or for up to a month's worth of absent days. That's an expansion from how the program previously existed, which was only 5 days per month that providers could bill for absent days. Again, meant to kind of provide more stability. And lastly, the initial income threshold increased from 185% of the federal poverty level to 200% of the federal poverty level in January 2022. So that's a fairly recent policy change, and that was meant to align with the SNAP program, which also increased its levels to 200%. I think we can go to the next slide. We also have made some recent changes in January of 2023, and are anticipating several changes to come. Some of this we've kind of mentioned, Kayla touched on for some of the more significant policy changes coming for the program prior to and during the transfer. I mentioned kind of some information around citizenship status that's on kind of coming down for future. So the things that have already changed in January were expanded student eligibility, which I touched on early on, just stating that students are now eligible with or without employment for ERDC, and that their childcare hours are no longer limited by work hours. We can also include study time for those students too, which is an expansion. Previously, families could only receive travel time. And now if you're a student, you can also receive childcare hours for both study time and travel time. So that's an exciting policy development. Additionally, there were changes in January to how hours were calculated for families. So now they're calculated on a part-time or full-time basis. It kind of depends on how many number of hours are provided from the family, showing that they're working or in school. If they're working between 1 and 20 hours per week, then they're authorized for that part-time slot at 20 hours per week. And if they are working or in school above 20 hours per week, but at or under 40 hours per week, then they're authorized for full-time authorization at 40 hours per week. This doesn't mean that it's limited to only that full-time amount. However, additional hours can still be authorized. So if families have overtime, if they have additional travel time needs, that sort of thing, they can get increased hours as well on top of that. And the thought behind some of this part-time, full-time authorization here is really to allow for family well-being hours. So that was something that was a part of House Bill 3073, but it allows families to use those excess childcare hours in whatever way best supports their family, while also providing stability for the provider for that number of hours that the parent is eligible for.
Jordan, there was a question in the chat about how study time hours are calculated. Do you want to just speak to that quickly?
Yes, I believe, I'm trying to think here. So it depends on the student status as a part-time or full-time student, which comes down to their number of student hours. And Kayla, if you can correct me on this, I don't have my notes in front of me for this particularly, but I believe it is 5 study hours per week for part-time students and 10 study hours per week for full-time students.
That's right. And so what determines if you're a part-time or a full-time, right? Which is, I think the question here is, we consider part-time, I think, up to 12 hours a week if you're in class, and then you would get sort of your, up to 12 plus 5, and that would constitute your calculation for part-time or full-time. If you're in class for more than 12 hours a week, you would get an additional 10 hours. So 12, let's use that as the base, plus your 10 puts you over sort of 20. So you'd get a full-time authorization and then plus travel time on top of that. We do have some infographics that are available that speak to this, and perhaps maybe we'll just find a way to circulate those as as an easy reference point, sort of easily digestible about how study hours are calculated, if that would be helpful. I hope that answered the question in the chat.
Thank you. Yes, that answered it. And I would really love to see that infographic.
Yeah, we can get those around. Absolutely.
And let me just say, we're going to need to kind of get through these quickly, Jordan. I think we've all seen them in our packet. So I think we're aware of what the bullets are.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to administration beyond program changes. ERDC is governed and administered across several federal and state partners. So the federal government, they set broad policy parameters through the Child Care Development Fund. And then that comes down through the Early Learning Division as lead agency, which will be future DELC, which really guides the use of those federal funds on a state level. And presently, ODHS makes that program available through Oregonians through the One Eligibility System. That will still remain, but beginning July 1st, the Early Learning Council will have the responsibility for adopting policy parameters of ERDC via the Oregon Administrative Rules.
Excellent.
Okay, so kind of just as a summary of everything we've talked about today, Bill 3073 transfers ERDC to the Department of Early Learning and Care as of July 1st. We know this. Current Early Learning Division staff, as well as ODHS Direct Pay Unit and their Child Care Policy staff, will be moving into the Department of Early Learning and Care as one collaborative agency to run employment-related daycare. An interagency agreement will continue to exist between DELC and ODHS, and ERDC eligibility will continue to be determined within the one system alongside other programs. Provider payments will continue to be paid out of the SA system, which is the system that it currently pays out payments from through the direct pay unit until a new provider management system can be developed and created. ERDC is being repealed from ODHS's rule set, and then the program policies will be housed within DELC's new rule set for July 1st. Rulemaking will occur, as you can see here, in a mirrored process to other current childcare programs and initiatives, and that will require votes from the Early Learning Council. And one thing here just to note is that because changes to the one system do require a lot of time and just a lot of work in getting change requests submitted and the system to be developed, policy discussions for future changes will be approached from DELC well in advance of effective dates and rule adoption to seek feedback and kind of thoughts on those policies that are being developed.
All right. Thank you, Jordan and Kayla. And Anne's asking two important questions. Are all ERDC staff moving over from ODHS? And do you see any challenges in the transfer?
Well, I think there's going to be challenges in a project this big, no matter if I said there were or wasn't, right? Like this is a very big lift for the agencies. And so, we're obviously tracking all of the very complicated systems, actions that we need to take, and mainframe and the one system. And so there, I think, are challenges across the board that are just inherent to a transition and inherent to having sort of an IT component play such a large role in the administration of a program. And that's really quite true for ERDC, right? The one system is beautiful in that it creates this open, ended access for families to have one-stop shopping for benefits programs, but that does make the sort of figuring out how to make sure it's administrated properly, especially across two agencies, right? Not just within one agency, a big challenge. And we're working in very close partnership with the, one eligibility partnership and ODHS on making sure that transition is done well. With regards to the staff, so technically there's no staff for ERDC. There are a couple of units that really support ERDC, the Child Care Policy Unit, the Direct Pay Unit, and the Subsidy Suspensions Team. We've been working hand in hand with both departments' HR teams to make sure that we're tracking, what available positions we have, where there might be vacancies, which staff are intending to migrate over, and, which aren't. And we've been, doing our due diligence on that and, ironing out any kinks. We're actually opening some positions coming up here to make sure that we are staffing up as appropriate, as is necessary, and making sure that we fill the positions that the legislature granted us in previous sessions. And so that's also being worked on actively. But, we have a great team over there at CCP and DPU and the subsidy suspensions. We're looking forward to having as much talent as possible, come over to DELC, and we're all actively working in partnership to make that happen. Okay. Any other questions? And so I know we're running up on time, but is there anything in terms of moving forward when we start bringing you actual content to sort of digest and really become familiar with, right? Like the next time we see you, we'll be taking you through the high points, the really sort of important, not that all of the rules aren't important, but the like really significant pieces of certain parts of the rule set. And so if there's anything that we should consider or be framing up or teeing up for you, we want to make sure we're taking that feedback and, incorporating it.
Yeah, and then
Kayla, I know that I probably don't need to say this, but will you be tracking the impact on the families who are going to be affected by this? And
of course,
stop there.
Yes, of course. And, I will say what Alyssa has said many, many, many times over, internally and externally. Everyone's goal is continuity of service, and that making sure that no family that has access before the transition doesn't have access after the transition. That is sort of the North Star of this project. Okay, Peter, I think you were.
Yeah, Kayla, I was just going to ask, I mentioned the one system several times and how hard it is to change it. From what I understand, people who are looking for work could actually be on ERDC if the one system could allow that the legislature has already allowed for people who are looking for work to be able to access childcare. And any prognosis on getting that accomplished this year?
Yeah, so I think you're speaking to the sort of parameters around authorized work search. Yep. That's currently not available at initial application, as you stated. We're looking for ways to actively open that up, but that is more of a sort of long-term policy goal. We did, however, recently open it up for folks who are on authorized medical leave. They can be eligible for ERDC at initial application. So we sort of took the first step in these January 1 changes, knowing that we need to keep pushing on making sure that authorized work search is something we're looking at to make available for families at initial application, not just in the course of, a certification or at research. So we're moving towards that. That's on our list. We know it's coming, but you're right. That's still an area where we have a little work to do.
Thanks.
Oh, and Chris O'Grady very rightly mentions, and I'll make sure that I flag this, that would require sort of some federal input as well related to CCDF. Okay. And I know I took up too much time, Sue, but any other questions?
Great presentation, Kayla and Jordan. And Jordan, welcome. We'll look forward to seeing more of you as well as more of Kayla. You'll be a regular part of our meetings.
Yes, we will. You will get tired of us. We apologize.
Well, the reverse may be true as well.
Thank you for having us today.
Okay, thanks a lot, you guys. Great work. Exciting transfer. Okay, speaking of Chris O'Grady, welcome, Chris. We are very interested in the alternative rate methodology, and I know there are questions from council members. So you will go ahead and start your presentation, and then we'll have a discussion.
Of course. Good afternoon, Chair Miller and members of the Early Learning Council. My name is Chris O'Grady and my pronouns are she, her. And I am the new Legal Affairs Manager for the Early Learning Division. And I am transitioning to this role from the Child Care and Development Fund Administrator, Jordan's current role, in which I was working on the alternative rate methodology. So in the future, there will be a transition in work, but today I'll be giving you the update on the alternative rate methodology. And I will also be referring to it as the alternative rate setting structure during the presentation. So sort of just interchangeable. Remy, are you able to bring up the slides?
Let me just add one thing and remind the council that Katie has been our representative in this process. So Katie, on behalf of the council, I want to thank you for being a part of this. So, okay, back to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you, Chair Miller. Next slide, Remy. So in addition to requiring that we become our own agency, the Department of Early Learning and Care, and transferring the employment-related daycare program, HB 3073 mandated that we move to an alternative rate methodology to determine the rates that we pay childcare providers for our subsidy program. Just as a reminder, right now, our subsidy programs are the employment-related daycare program and Baby Promise. So this will impact the rates for the employment-related daycare program and the base rate payments for Baby Promise, because we use ERDC to make those. And the additional payments for Baby Promise are on top of those ERDC base rates. So there is a limited impact on our subsidy programs to the employment-related daycare program and Baby Promise for right now for this alternative rate methodology. The goal is that we are transitioning to an approved alternative rate setting structure that's determined by operating cost rather than the market price, and develop subsidy rates such that ERDC families can theoretically access at least 75% of providers that are available to them. This stands in on the federal level as the stand-in for what equal access could mean. And just as a reminder, as of June 1st of 2022, we actually went to 90% of the market price study of 2020 for reimbursement rates. But as you know, as the economic factors change within the market, the rate at which we are currently paying providers does change over time, and that percentage changes. That's why we use that kind of stand-in as the 75% of providers, because that is outlined as a federal goal. HB 3073 also requires that we have certain factors in this cost methodology. So one of them is participating in quality improvement measures, and that's our SPARK. The second is providing culturally or linguistically specific or appropriate care. The third is providing evening, overnight, or weekend care. The fourth is providing care to children with a diagnosed disability. The fifth is providing infant or toddler care. The sixth is providing care to a population that has been identified as historically having an inadequate child care provider supply. And the last one is providing any other specialized care that justifies a higher rate of reimbursement. So while this is what is required in HB 3073 on a state level, when we have our plan for an alternative rate methodology, we will also have to submit this to the Federal Office of Child Care for approval, because we will be using the Child Care and Development Funds to do this. And the Child Care and Development Funds do have those federal code of federal regulations that codify how we spend those funds as a state. Remy, you can move over to the next slide. So one of the first steps in moving this work forward was to convene an advisory committee for the alternative rate methodology. And as Chair Miller mentioned, Katie Brooks was the representative from the Early Learning Council that served on the advisory committee. And the advisory committee was really set out to create a specific framework and principle recommendations that will guide the transition to the new rate structure. So the principles that they worked out was leading with equity to ensure that children and families have access to the various types of care that are available to them, and that they decide is the most inclusive, nurturing, and culturally linguistically responsive child care environment for their family, and to make sure that the expense and cost drivers in the alternative rate methodology are centered in equity and account for the holistic needs of children and families and the providers that are serving with them, and making sure that they have adequate compensation to do the work that they do every day with children and families. The second one is the representation of all provider types and ensuring that the funding structures and cost models covers the true operational costs of any provider type that's providing care in Oregon, which includes licensed and license exempt providers, and that the structure should have aspects that encourage the recruitment and retention of diverse providers, staff, and substitutes who reflect the racial, ethnic, linguistic, and geographic diversity of all Oregonians. They also mentioned that we need simplicity and flexibility. The cost models need to be clear and straightforward cost calculations that are inclusive of all costs and account for various characteristics of all childcare program types. So the revenue and expense structures and cost models should be easy for anyone to understand. I know economic models sometimes are never easy, but trying to simplify them as much as we can and make them flexible so that they reflect the personnel costs that are associated with workforce recruitment and retention, has room for incentives, and then allows for the provider's choice in how they choose to engage with Spark and the pathways in which they want to use Spark continuous quality improvement. And then the continuous quality improvement is that various incentives for provider and staff engagement with quality and professional development supports would be available to them and incorporated into this model, and that there was just no single pathway for professional and educational development, that there could be a myriad of pathways that accounts for the various needs of providers and their staff, while recognizing the value of lived experience. And this is all then to support the viability and sustainability of our providers. Subsidy payment rates only compensate for children in a provider's care who are receiving subsidies. So with this model, we want to more fully compensate a provider for the type of care they're providing, and the alternative rate setting methodology should account for some of the universal operating costs of sustaining a child care provider's model. And so that when a child that is on subsidy either comes or leaves their program, it doesn't significantly alter the economic operational costs and revenue that the provider is receiving at any given time. And some of just the additional considerations that the advisory committee spoke to is that we need to take into account the regional analysis of costs and what this means to providers and families, and startup and supply building costs that might not necessarily be everyday operational costs, but are there nonetheless, especially as we look at building supply and retaining supply in Oregon. Next slide, please, Remy.
So Chris, let me just tell you, we've only got 10 minutes left.
Okay.
And I know we've got some discussion people want to have about the timing of this whole piece.
So I will be very quick.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
That's okay. The Federal Office of Child Care allows us to use two different frameworks. Right now, we are still using the market price study. There are some challenges associated with the market price study. And that is why we are moving over to the alternative rate methodology to really capture all of the true operational costs for providers. You can read what these challenges are. For the time being, even when we have an alternative rate methodology approved by the Federal Office of Child Care, we will still be collecting the same data that we are doing for the market price study to really accommodate all of the needs and price points for economic models and for how the economic factors change for childcare providers in Oregon, just to ensure that we're getting all of the information that we can to inform rate setting. Next slide. Because of that, there are cost estimation adjustments in the cost models by the type of care. We do have some cost models that are available from our cost of quality study, and you can see when we move forward with the alternative rate methodology and further adapt our cost models, they will again be adapted by the type of care. So for child care centers, for family child care, and for licensed exempt providers. Next slide. So when you look at a cost estimation model, there are some things that we will have and account for. The cost drivers are listed here, and this is kind of the base model of what the cost drivers are in any cost model, and will be included in our alternative rate methodology. So this is the size of the center and the home, qualifications of teaching staff, salary, our quality variables, benefits, and efficiency standards. The factors that we need to include by HB 3073 can be included as cost drivers in the cost estimation model. They can also be included as incentives that are given to providers through participation in Spark. And I think I'll keep that really high level on just the differentiation between cost drivers, how we'll address our factors, and how they can also be included as incentives. Next slide, Remy. All right, so this is our last slide. We will be doing a phased implementation. We really need the infrastructure and support to do this. Working on a cost model and having various cost drivers and revenue for different types of providers in the state based on their participation in Spark and our Spark revision just requires us to have more infrastructure development as we become DELC and move the ERDC program over to the new agency. So our first goal and the first stage of implementing the new alternative rate methodology really begins in March of 2023. We are still subject, and the rates are still subject to bargaining with the childcare unions. And so this will be the current model that we use. We will release a new market rate study report, and that will be used as a tool to inform the bargaining table that we have with unions. And then we will align our alternative rate setting structure with the Spark revision work and the engagement that they'll be doing. The goal for fall and winter of 2023 is to submit a plan for use of an alternative rate methodology to determine rates to the Federal Office of Child Care and to get that federal approval. The next step would be stage 3, and the goal of spring or summer of 2024 to actually implement the new alternative rate setting structure to set ERDC rates, which again will also impact baby promise rates. And then the goal in fall of 2025 is to have the full implementation of the alternative rate methodology when we'll collect new data to update and adjust the alternative rate setting structure to reflect the iterative updates to Spark, and we'll launch our provider management platform that has additional functionalities and data integration that can pull different types of professional development, participation, and different types of care that a provider is giving to adjust those rates identified within the cost model.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Sorry for needing you to do rapid fire.
It's okay.
I'm going to turn it over to Anne to make some comments and questions.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me go first here. So thank you, Chris. That was a great presentation. And so I'm one of the people who's asking about the timing of all of this. And also I want to disaggregate one thing which has to do with rural locations. And so I realized that in this market rate analysis, one thing depends on the other. And so we just had the Spark presentation. And so we know that that will feed into all of this. But one of the things that I'm about to get on my high horse of rural inequity right now. So fasten your seatbelts, everybody. I sent to Remy a 2-page thing that we report that we had commissioned by Louise Stoney. I don't know, Remy, if you can share the first page. But the big question that we have is that the inequity between rural and urban reimbursement rates. And the thing is that they are so different, it is actually pretty shocking. And I don't know if you can scroll down, Remy, but if you go to, and if you can expand it a little bit. What we did is we commissioned, you can stop there for right now. We commissioned a report that looked at Coos County versus Multnomah County. The idea here was to say, what is the market price that is used to base the sort of the subsidy on? And it is so different between a typical rural county, Coos, Curry, and Multnomah, whereas the cost of delivering the service is basically the same. Slightly different because rent is a little bit different, but since wages are the largest cost driver, the cost is really similar in rural and urban. And if you look at the difference, then the cost gap between Coos, Curry County as a typical rural county and Multnomah, it's huge. And you could scroll down, Remy, to the second one that said need to. The state share is 76% lower in Coos County than it is in Multnomah County. This inequity makes it impossible for rural childcare providers. Now, I don't know whether the need for one rate across the state is on your agenda, Chris. And in some ways, if it isn't, that's kind of good news, because I understand that this is going to take time. And if we can separate it out and deal with this issue as something that is so urgent, that is so debilitating for rural areas, and delink it from the broader market study, we might even be able to make some progress on it. If the state could just recognize we need one rate or close to one rate, that would be a huge, huge win for all of us in rural areas. And if you are including this rural urban differential in the study, in the market study, is there anything we can do to advance it, move it sooner, have a stopgap, emergency, something to make it happen quickly? So I just want to thank you and just put on the agenda how urgent this is for rural. I mean, how huge the cost gap is. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you for elevating this, Anne. I want to make 2 points in response to this graphic. This was published in 2021. Since this was published, we actually had 2 increases in provider rates. One was in January of 2022, and the next one was in June of 2022, where we moved to 90% of the market rate for ERDC providers. And we had the adjustment with the copay structure. So it does look a little bit different now. We are in the process of doing our market price study revision. So because there's been a lot of changes in the market because of COVID-19 and inflation and what we've seen. So data collection ended the first week of January of 2023. And so data analysis is beginning. We are looking at the regional analysis of rates and price, and looking to see if we should adjust those when we are looking at the data analysis in the next month with our research partner, Oregon State University. And then we will enter bargaining with the unions in March with that information and the new report that is authored by Oregon State University. I also just want to mention that when we did our cost of quality study, you are right. When we did look at the operational costs, there were not huge differences in region. And so that is something that we are hoping to address when we move through the alternative rate methodology and really making sure that providers are compensated for the true operational costs of providing care. But right now we are looking at different factors and tools that we can use within the market price study and the approved plan that we have from the Federal Office of Child Care to address those needs.
So that's great, Chris. I really appreciate it. My plea is to remember that the cost for urban and rural should not be on two different scales. They just shouldn't be at all. So thank you for that. And the more you can do to bring rural up to urban, the better we're all, the rest of us in the state are going to be. So I appreciate that. And oh, can I just say to Sue and the rest of the ELC, this is why I believe that the geographic difference should be different, should be pulled out from the other part of the DEI work, because I think structural racism is really important and racial inequities are really important and so on. But structural urbanism is also important, and it plays out in something like this really clearly. So anyway, a little aside there, Chris.
No.
Sorry.
Great point. So Chris, would it be appropriate to ask you for an update on this either in February or at our March meeting? Based on what you're doing with OSU, if I understood that correctly?
We can work on who will be doing that presentation. So I am transitioning some of this work to Jordan, but it will either be Jordan or I. And I see David came off mute. So
and then I know Chris mentioned this, but the thing I also just want everyone to remember, rates are ultimately part of collective bargaining agreement and created through the collective bargaining agreement. So the next round of, we will be entering into bargaining this spring, and that usually will probably roll into early summer. And so that's what the new rates will ultimately come out of.
Okay, so David, I don't know if that means yes, we could get an update from somebody, Jordan or Chris, in February or March on whatever OSU is.
I think we would be able, probably April might be more reasonable to give an update on the updated market rates, study information, and what that research is showing. But again, I just wanted to reiterate the process by which the actual rates are set.
We understand you are not in charge of that, David. We might wish you were. Okay, so Remy, when we put the dots on our work plan, will you put that into April? Thank you. Chris, thank you very much. You've done a fabulous job with this, and we appreciate that very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, we are out of time as usual. More to talk about than time to talk. So legislative updates, all I would say is if you're on OLIS, just watch for what's going on in the Early Childhood and Human Services Committee. That's where most of DELC bills will be heading through. But obviously there are lots of others from our other state agency partners. And Peter just put in, Our Children Oregon, they have a great website and agenda, as does the Children's Institute, and there are all sorts of early childhood agendas out there. Whew. So thank you all very much. I appreciate you being with us today. Remember, to next month's meeting, we're going to do in Salem for those of us who want to be in person. And we'll also do it virtually. So you can be on a screen or you can be in a room, depending on how it works for your schedules. Maybe you want to come to Salem and spend some time at the Capitol when you're not in our meeting. Who knows? Anyway, that'll be February. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.